boom, we have this giant windfall gain of hundreds of millions. And that set me well ahead of a lot of other players right then and there. And there became these crazy memes that I was this duo ogre wielding warrior. Now, I spent all of my time on economics at that point, learning the workshops, building my strategies, not practicing PvP. And there are great videos where I have my duo ogre ring and I'm fighting in Node Wars and I'm just completely killed by a ranger. It's pretty funny. His ultimate, not his ultimate, but my ultimate's trying to engage. I misplaced it and I die. And it was so funny to everyone because I was so extremely well geared. Why was I geared? I'm sure I wasn't the best at making money. I wasn't the best at grinding. I wasn't the best at PvP. If I was the best at anything, and I don't think I really ever was, it was patience. Just waiting. And that's available to all of us that have willpower. Now that's one example. Okay, well, what about your pens? What about the big gains, Blade, right? That's what you're thinking? Well, January 2018 comes around, and I'm adhering to my silver threshold gearing method. Absolutely, that's what I would always do. As soon as I got the duo ogre, I would start building it up again for the next piece. And my next threshold was, of course, the tri-ogre. And I got that somewhere in January of 2017. And then it was the Tet ogre, which was, at that point, I think 7.8 billion. You can ask Choice. Choice attempted to make a variety of Tet ogres until I convinced him that his leverage, his net worth, his money that he's spending every hour for goes so much further if he would simply bid. And he took an over 20 billion pre-order off a Tet ogre, and he started bidding like I suggested, and he got it. And he got it. And what did that do? That saved him 10, 15 billion of what he would have spent. So think about that. That's your opportunity cost. By patience, by saving, by bids, you are giving up the next best option of getting it, which in his case was an extremely high pre-order. That saved him 15 billion. Just added, that to his bank for him to use for his next piece of gear. Or if you're enhancing it, pre-orders and enhancing costs were around the same a lot of times. So that opportunity cost is either a high pre-order or it's that enhancing, and it's at that for that item 10 billion. Well, January of 2018 comes around, you guys. In January 2018, I bought the first ever pen Nuver sold on the market. No one ever thought it would be sold. I had the silver. Other people had the silver too. I just happened to be playing at 5 in the morning. It was 4.3 billion, a pen Nuver. Now you know how much more valuable that's worth than 4.3 billion. And guess what? Because I was incredibly patient, I had these great strategies, I tried my absolute best to convince everybody of it, made so many guides that I always talk about this on live stream openly. Very few people do, but these are available to you when you guys have these goals. As you play on whatever server you play, this is available to you. And so a week later comes by, and then I buy the first ever pen Red Nose. It was never sold before. I was ready. I had the money. I bought it. It was 3.5 billion. How much does it cost to make a pen Red Nose? A lot more than that. A huge amount more than that. 1 week later, the first pen Muskins is ever listed on North America. Guess who bought it? I bought that too.
And I'm already kind of getting the chills looking at Blade Poke's name in this arena already. You played as a teammate of his last time. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to play on his main class warrior. But do you think he's gonna do well on this time around? I have high hopes for him.
100%. I have to say that in terms of pure gear-related skill in this game, Blade Boquest topples 99.9% of the players here. The man has purchased in the last month 3 pen items. 3 pen items, count it. It has been an amazing month for Blade Boquest, and he's
actually it's 4 technically.
Are you kidding me?
Is that
No,
is that
he
counting
bought
the
4 pens.
counting the blue greatsword? Is that?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Blade BoQuest has 4 pen items. I would say that the chances are very, very slim that he gets taken out of this tournament.
And then a week after that, I bought the first ever pen mercenary steel greatsword on the market. Now, why? Because I was willing to say no to the good to say yes to the best. Now, of course, you're thinking dim tree over red nose, things like that. But for me, pen, it had the same DR and the same evasion, so that was actually my target. And that's what you have to do. If you spend your money on every single increment, it might be more interesting in the actions of playing a game, but I'm telling you, you're gonna lose out long term. And the way I was able to get this crazy success, I mean, this is 4 years into this game, you guys. I'm still rank 1 wealth. I mean, I know now, finally, in the recent months, that there are players that have more silver than I do. But you can see the results of this. They speak for themselves because they're right. And I've tried my best to tell you guys about this. And a lot of you guys have listened. I mean, I have made, where my guides, my audience have become, there's been so many billionaires made off of these strategies. Like, you guys sometimes are listening. And as this is my last Black Desert guide, it's a bit of a rant. I want to empower you guys to be patient and to think and to realize that you can do it. And that I'm not better than any other player. I just happen to be patient and think, and this is the result. And you guys can do this. I know you can do this. It does depend on how much of your life you're willing to give up in order to earn some certain results. I put a lot into what I've done here. Now let's move on to the whole core of this video. Where's the 200+ billion coming from? Again, I knew the silver threshold would work from the very beginning, and I worked it from the very beginning. And people would catch on and start to do it and start to understand, and it became more acceptable for the billionaires to think this way. Well, the big gains were when it was pen accessories. Now, I had worked on pen accessories for years, and hopefully you guys have seen the wagon reveal. It's the best video I've ever made. It was my second biggest investment ever, and it's a hilarious video meme. It's great. That afforded me the first pen Layton. Okay, actually the second pen Layton ever sold in North America. Does that say what I think it says? Does that actually say? That does not say that I just got a pen Layton. Pen Layton. We've been working on this pen accessory for 3 years. It was 21.7 billion for a pen Layton. Pen Layton. Now, we already talked about the probability earlier, right? So if you have 15 Tet Laytons, and Tet Laytons, let's just say an arbitrary cost of 10 billion, right? So it goes up and down, but we'll just say 10 billion. If you have a pretty high fail stack, like in the 200 ballpark, which is pretty costly in its own right, and you're going for a 10% chance on success to get this accessory, if you did 15 attempts, you're looking at an 80% chance of your, at that point, over 150 billion not being wasted. You have a 20% chance to lose everything in that scenario, but you have an 80% chance investing 150 billion to get a pen Layton. Well, I had a 100% chance at 21.7%, or it's 21.7 billion, because I waited for it. And if I didn't get it, I'd still have the money. So it was either a certain exchange this money for the Layton at this cost, or you have your money and it's no loss to you. So what did that do? The 21 billion saved me probably 150 billion right there of opportunity cost of what I would have to spend on average in order to create this. But I did it the same way all of these guys were. And I don't know, I know my tone is almost a little patronizing at this point. I don't mean it to be. But yeah, guys, I want you to believe in yourselves. You can do this. I'm not better than other players, but I have been able to achieve a lot more than almost every player. And it's not because of some insane, miraculous innate skill or anything. It's just very common practices that were utilized. And the best strategy in the world won't work if you don't. So I want to encourage you guys, and I know it's a bit of a stern tone. If it's not important to you, I mean, hey, this is a game, and you guys should get out of it exactly what you want, and no more and no less. And that's why for me, my pinnacle of playing BDO was reaching 300 AP. That's what I wanted to do. I did it with a Tet Neuver, which is funny. Even though I had the pen earlier, I sold that for investments, which worked out. But yeah, I stopped at 300 AP. That was what I wanted out of the game. This game is so easily playable for decades, and it just depends on what you want to trade a portion of your life for the entertainment that you're getting out of it. Alright, well, good. Penn Leighton. 150 plus billion. That's awesome. Well, guess what? Because I had this silver threshold gearing method, and because my next investments went well, if you haven't seen my how I made 55 billion in 5 hours video, that's my hands down best investment guide I've ever made. It analyzes the market, commodity, inflation, and it gives you exactly the how to think on investing. And I've not seen that anywhere. And what also is cool about that is I filmed the entire thing, and I filmed my entire thought process while I was buying. Not when I was selling everything and like, hey, I made all this profit. No. I did it while I was buying my investments because I was so certain that it would work. And it made me 55 billion in 5 hours. So a couple months after the Penn Leighton from the wagon reveal, within 2 months, I had enough dozens of billions. I mean, probably, I don't know, 100 billion or something. In like June of 2019, where I just had more pre-orders on things. And I pre-ordered then a Penn Crescent. I got the Penn Crescent at 32.7 billion. A day later, I got a second Penn Crescent. Because finally at this stage, this is what I've been waiting for people to actually have the items that I needed so that you would start to see them on the marketplace. So in 24 hours, I actually got 2 Penn Crescents.
Yes! God, yes! Yes! Yes, there it is! Yes! Let's do this! Let's freaking go! Let's freaking go right now! I just beat Black Desert Online! You were all here for it! You were all here! Let's freaking go! Yes! Guys, that's not all. Because that's the second Penn Crescent I bought today. Months, 300 wagons, get this Penn Leighton, 21 billion, 32.7, 32.7, double Penn Crescent in 24 hours. Oh.
And then I went to TwitchCon, I think. No, E3, that's what it was back in the summer. And I had a pre-order on a Bassi belt. And I got a Bassi belt for 24 billion, I think.
And my 15th pin in Black Desert history is a Penn freaking Bassi belt. Penn Leighton, Penn Crescents, and now, yes, God, yes, I got a freaking Penn Bassi belt. Can I stop, please? My God, wasn't even playing this last week. I went to E3. What?
So what is the cost to get these things? You know, even at the smallest degree, you would have to pay, again, on average. People get them earlier than this, and people never ever get them, no matter how many billions or hundreds of billions they put in. But on average, a pen crescent is not worth anything less than 75 billion, at least at the time that I purchased it. So that immediately doubled my net worth, and or that investment. So think about that. If you could spend 30 billion and not lose anything, if you don't get the item, you don't get it, you still have your money. But if you do get it, it increases your net worth by double. And we're talking about an extra 30, 40 billion. How can you afford to grind hour after hour after hour after hour after hour after hour to earn the extra 100, 200, 500 billion to get the kind of gear that the top players in the world have? You can't. There aren't enough hours. There are not enough hours. And when I was in Korea with Choice, we were discussing this. And it was not easy, but we talked about it. He brought it up to me. Like, he thought, what is the best strategy to get this kind of thing? And what should you be doing with this gear and investments? And I was pretty clear on it. I said, pretty soon, a Pen Tungrad ring will be listed in North America. I can feel it. It's about that time. I had a pre-order on it the day it came out, but of course it takes forever for people to get enough and enhance them and then eventually sell it at the loss that we had to because of the restrictions and the fact that we don't have a free market that allows people to earn the value that they deserve. We don't have that. We have a restricted market. It's better now. I knew it was coming. Choice unfortunately couldn't get the 50, 60 billion, whatever it was. He was pretty invested in Cafris. I mean, top geared, top grinder, top streamer, top everything. PvPer, like he was the top of his game. Still is. And so he asked me if I would put a pre-order on it.
One ring to bind them. One ring to bring them all to the... Why? Because you have a chance, it's slight, but you have a chance someone will sell it, and if someone sells it, you've earned 200 billion, which represents, nowadays, I don't know, we'll say hundreds of hours. I don't think I want to say thousands of hours, but hundreds of hours that you don't have to spend. I was like, everything is leverage. That's how I became one of the most geared players in North America without being the best at anything, right? I'm not the best at anything, I don't think. I'm just okay at a lot of stuff, and I've leveraged my success into greater success. So we had this conversation. Well, here's the thing. I want to tell you my final plan, and I might as well just tell you. Should I tell you the final think tank plan right now?
And so he asked me if I would put a pre-order on it because he knew I was phasing out of the game and he knows my final think tank plan. And I said, fine. Yeah. I said, okay. So I actually had a pre-order on that thing only until he could get enough money to cover it. Now, if I bought it, I sold it to him immediately at minimum so that he could buy it. He could get the first Pen Tungrad ring ever sold in an A. That's what we both wanted. I knew it was going to happen, and I was covering the pre-order until he could, and I actually sold it within that week, minimum price. Now, I want this to be clear. I've never done any real market trading. All of the items I have bought and sold have only had silver as a transaction. I've never taken anything on third-party payments at all, and I never will. It's against terms of service. Now, that alone is enough to make me not do it. And so many people couldn't care less about that. It means nothing to them. And honestly, if I sold any of this stuff, I don't know because I've not gone to these sites and stuff, but I imagine I would get far more than I've ever made as a content creator for probably years. Like, I know that there's value, but I don't own it, you guys. We're renting our accounts. We sign agreements with these companies, and it's against TOS, and I've never done it. I want that to go on record for anyone who's unsure, because I get these questions all the time. But I just sold it to him because I wanted him to have it, and we talked about it. Now, where'd my other stuff go? Milkbag, who I consider the greatest warrior in the game, fantastic, amazing PvPer, he didn't have a Penzarka, and I made my own Penzarka. I wouldn't have sold my Pen Dandelion and Zarka if not for the people that just wanted to carry on blades that were created by me. So I sold my pen Zarka to Milkbag. It was min price. I sold my pen Leighton, the first legit pen Leighton ever sold in the North American market. One was sold before that, which there are rumors of real market trading. They seem credible, so that's completely disregarded. So the first one ever, first legit pen Leighton ever sold in NA, which I bought from the Wagon Investment, which makes it so legendary, that's in Zethian's hands now. And in order to do that, I bought his pen Narc at maximum, so that he'd have the money, and then he bought my pen Leighton at minimum, so that he could carry it on. I wanted him to have it. I was happy to facilitate it, and nothing outside of the game was transacted. You know, we were guildmates. Zethian used to stream snipe me and kill me and stuff, but he's a streamer. I really respect him as a warrior, and I think it's amazing that he wanted to carry that on. Let's see. One of the Snake Guildies has my Pen Crescent. I don't know where my second Pen Crescent went. I don't know where my Bassi went. I then later sold the Pen Narc that I bought at max. I sold it at min. I sold my Dandelion, not at max or min. That went to a person named Fulltime Neckbeard, who actually transferred it into a Ninja Dandelion. So that doesn't actually have my name on it anymore because I listed it when he had a buy order on it and it was removed. I had, let's see, Ventos's Pen Vanguard Shield. Don't remember who took that. And basically, because I'm not actively playing the game, I've decided, you know, and already did it, obviously, to give everything back that I had. Which has created whatever silver, you know, is still in my banks. And, you know, people have asked, why haven't I just bought out a whole category of the market or something like that? I did buy out the coal at one point, which was more of a meme than anything. If you guys aren't familiar with that. I have 3,400,000 coal still. That's a pretty good meme. It's on my channel. But, yeah, even if I did that, it wouldn't really help people because I would have all of one item and that net worth would still be with me, right? They would have the silver, I would have the items, and then the game changes over the years that I'm not active, and then whatever I have is probably worth more than whatever silver I spent, and at that point it's just a wash. So I gave my gear back to the community, but I still have the silver. Anyway, do you guys understand? The silver threshold gearing method made so much more sense before the central market. It still makes sense whenever you're looking at pen accessories because they're almost always sold less than the cost it takes to get them. And when it came to those 2 months, getting a pen Bassi, a pen Leighton, a pen Crescent, that cost me total, what, like, I don't know, 65 mil, and then probably, it cost me just over 100 mil. 100 mil to 110 million for something that would cost me over 300 million to create myself. Probably close to the 350, or, you know, I might never be able to get it with 500 million or 500 billion. So that's how, you guys, through these unique strategies, I've been able to create over 300 billion net worth in 2 months. And sorry for the long-winded explanation. Yeah, like I said, Black Desert has been quite a journey for me, and this is my last guide, so I'm just kind of letting it out, I guess. I've got some more videos to make for you. Obviously, you guys can see with the Patreon support and things like that, I've been on YouTube for 9 years. It's not been monetized until this April, so everything has actually been for free or whatever, you know, support has come in through Twitch. But I have over 300 videos on YouTube, or 4 million viewers, and $39 of Patreons. I appreciate the 5 of you guys that are there, and all of my viewers. You know, I know not everybody can support, but I can't devote the time that I have to YouTube. I've spent so much time here. It's almost unbelievable. But I've left the best systems I could for every future Black Desert player, and I really hope you guys use them because they'll work. They'll absolutely work. I want you to believe in yourself, or at the very least, believe in me, because I believe in you, and I know you can do it. So good luck, guys, and thanks for watching what I believe is my last Black Desert guide. Once my other Black Desert videos are complete, look for that final week on Twitch. Twitch.tv/BladeBoquest. I'll be doing something that no player has ever done, and something involving all of my silver. Thanks for watching, guys.
Hey guys, my name is Pansy and welcome to my bartering guide. In this video, I will guide you from zero bartering experience to making a ton of money by bartering. Personally, I make anywhere from 300 mil to 500 mil a day by bartering, but this completely depends on how much time I spend on the game. I must stress guys, bartering is not a get-rich-quick scheme, it takes many hours. However, it is low-effort gameplay, so even if you're spending 12 hours a day bartering, you're doing very little work yourself. Please do read the description down below. If I find any new relevant information or mistakes or any amendments I need to include in the video, I'll update it down there. Finally, before we begin, guys, low-key, I need to get something straight. I kept stuttering when I pronounced Caravel and Gallius, so I decided to change the pronunciations in this video to Caravel and Galus. No joke, so just go with it and let's get started. Section 1. Introduction to Bartering. Bartering is a life skill which became a part of Black Desert with the Great Expedition update. It allows you to exchange materials you've gathered by sailing to barter NPCs located on islands and ocean objects. There are 5 types of barter items, level 1 to level 5. Level 1 and level 2 items cannot be NPC'd for silver, but level 3, 4, and 5 can. Level 3 items will net you 1 million silver, level 4 items will net you 2 million silver, and level 5 items will net you either 5 million silver, or some of them are worth 10 million silver. Level 4 and 5 items can be exchanged for crow coins as well at certain barters. To access the barter menu, hit escape and go to life and barter. The hotkeys are F6 and then 9. If you're using the old menu, the barter menu is located on the bottom left. Now, when you first take a look at your menu, you won't see too many routes. But don't worry, as you progress with your bartering journey, you'll complete more and more barters. As your bartering count goes up, the number of routes you unlock and special barters also goes up. Now let's see how we can get started with bartering. Section 2. The Great Expedition Questline. Your first step to bartering is doing the Great Expedition Achilles' Eye questline under the suggested tab of your quest log. This questline will give you an introduction into bartering and sea content, as well as how to hire sailors, provides 5 free sailor slots, a free Bartali sailboat via Quest Jarrett support, a free Euphoria cog, and a ton of sailing XP getting you from beginner to skilled very quickly. I recommend you increase your life skilling and sailing XP bonuses before turning in the quests which reward the XP. You can do this by using seafood cron meals or any other food buffs, elixir of time or verdure droughts, silver sailor's clothing, Logia or other life skill accessories, and other XP bonuses you can think of. Sailing XP is very hard to come by guys, so make the most of this. This questline requires you to kill a few sea monsters, so this can be very tedious if you have a Bartali sailboat, so honestly I'd recommend you get an improved Euphoria frigate, sailboat, or find someone to help you. I've personally tried to kill sea monsters solo on the Bartali sailboat. It was not fun, it took forever. So for the next section, let's take a look at how to upgrade a Bartali sailboat to an Euphoria. Section 3. Bartali sailboat. In order to upgrade the Bartali sailboat, go to the Wharf Manager and select your boat and hit Upgrade Ship. Here you can see the material required in order to upgrade the ship. Click the right arrow, you can navigate to the frigate as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind, while this is cheaper than buying the ship outright, it is difficult to gather some of these materials because they're always sold out. And for example, with the pine-coated plywood, the pre-order limit is 50, and you need 1,000 of these. Also, the coconuts always have pre-orders on them, so It will take time. If you have a node gathering the coconuts ahead of time, great. But, just keep it in mind. You're going to be trading time for money here. So, at the moment, the prices of the Furious sailboat and the frigate are a bit high. Let's take a look here. So, it's up to you if you want to drop the money here and directly just upgrade to an improved Euphoria. But personally, I did it because it saved me a lot of time. It's completely up to you. So just make the choice depending on what you can do. For the items required, for the sailboat, you need a full set of the plus 10 gear, which you can buy the base Bartali sailboat gear from Velocity in Portaferia and upgrade with Blackstone armors. Next, you need 800 standardized timber square, 600 steel, 1,500 pine plywood, 300 flax fabric, 100 hard pillar, and 1 ship upgrade permit, Euphoria sailboat, which you buy for 100 million from Velocity. Similarly, for the frigate, you need a full set of the plus 10 gear. Once again, you buy the base from Velocity, then 1,000 standardized timber square, 800 jade coral ingot, 1,000 pine coated plywood, 450 enhanced flax fabric, 100 hard pillars, and the ship upgrade permit Euphoria frigate, which you buy for 200 million from Velocity. So when it comes to upgrading the Bartali sailboat, you'll definitely save money, but it will take some time to get all the pre-orders in or gather the materials, so the choice is yours. Do you want to save time or do you want to save money? Honestly, I bought my Euphoria sailboat and I was able to make that money back, no problem. So it's up to you. Now let's take a look at how to upgrade the Euphoria sailboat and the Euphoria frigate to the improved variants. Once you've acquired an Euphoria sailboat or an Euphoria frigate, I definitely recommend you upgrade to an improved variant. What the improved version does is it allows you to fire the cannons while steering the ship, which is huge because you need to farm sea monsters in order to get some of the materials for the Euphoria Caravel or the Galus. You can upgrade it in the same manner by going to the Wharf Manager and hitting Upgrade Ship. Now let's take a look at the items required. For the improved Euphoria sailboat, you need 250 standardized timber square, 200 steel, 500 pine plywood, 100 flax fabric, 30 hard pillar, 10 ultimate armor reform stone, and 1 of each base armors. So you need the Euphoria old prow, old plating, old cannon, old wind sail. The armors can be bought from Velocity at Portaferia. For the improved Euphoria frigate, you need 250 standardized timber square, 200 steel, 500 pine plywood, 100 flax fabric, 30 hard pillars, 10 ultimate weapon reform stones, and 1 of each armor piece. The armor pieces need to be base. Section 4, Bartering Basics. Alright guys, now that we have the improved Euphoria sailboat or improved Euphoria frigate, I'm going to show you how to barter, what you need to keep in mind, and then we'll move on to upgrading the ships to the Caravel or the Galus. Now open up the barter menu by clicking escape and clicking the barter icon on the bottom left. Now in this menu there's a few things to understand. The first is parlay. This is basically the currency required in order to complete barters. This starts off at 1 million and depletes all the way down to 0. When you have no more parlay remaining, you must refresh your barters and get new barters, and you restart at 1 million parlay. Now let's take a look at the complete barter route. On the screen I've displayed all of them at the same time for your convenience. The first row is the red tree lump for the level 1 item. This can be completed 6 times. However, for the next barter, you only need 2 of those raft toys. That means you don't need to complete the first one 6 times because you'll have a surplus of 4. But it is important to do so, especially when you're upgrading to the Caravel or the Galus, because those level 1 barter items are traded for verdant blackstones, which you will get 100 of them from a quest, but you need to farm the other 120 yourself, and this is the best way to get them. So what happens when you overstack your ship? Well, a 10,000 unit ship can be overstacked all the way to about 17,000. So if you start off with an Euphoria sailboat or an improved Euphoria sailboat, you can overstack it to around 7 point something thousand, which will really slow down your ship. You won't be able to use breezy sail. However, sometimes it is better to do so. So how you figure that out is just look at the distance you have to travel in order to bank. Is it worth making 2 trips or just taking 1 slow trip? So this is an important thing to keep in mind because this will save you time later on. Now, overstacking for the remaining items is also quite important as well, but that comes into play once you already have a Caravel or a Galus, because that's when you really want to have a big stockpile of everything. Now coming back to the menu, on the top left you see special barter. After 140 barters completed, this will randomly show up. So every several hundred barters I tend to see it pop up for me, and most of the time it's quite useful to do, sometimes it's not. That depends on the prices. Now let's take a look at how to navigate this menu. So when you first open it up, it's going to look like this.
Hello and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Druk. Employment data has started to come out from a number of states reflecting America's new reality, and the rise in unemployment looks unprecedented. Overnight, the labor market has gone from historically strong to experts questioning just how bad it could get. Markets have also been racking up steep losses for weeks now. It's clear that the economic toll of the coronavirus is going to be dramatic. So on today's podcast, we're going to dig into the data and talk about the scale of the damage, who it's most likely to affect, and how our government is responding. So here with me to do that are senior writer Amelia Thompson-Devoe. Hey, Amelia.
Hey, Galen.
As we are all reorienting ourselves towards covering the coronavirus, Amelia is going to be focusing on the economic impact, so Amelia will be checking in with you on that periodically. Also here with us is Tara Sinclair, Professor of Economics and International Affairs at George Washington University. She's also a Senior Fellow at the job site Indeed. Hi, Tara. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Galen. Hi, Amelia.
So, Tara, let's begin with the broad picture. From where you sit, what is the state of the American economy?
Well, right now, we're really in a huge state of uncertainty. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things changing very, very quickly. And I think what everybody's looking at right now is how fast are things changing, where are things going, and when is this feeling of the bottom falling out going to settle in and we can really start to assess the damage.
Is there any question whether we're in a recession right now?
Well, it really depends on how we think about defining a recession, because it's clear we are in a very different economic state than we were in even just a few weeks ago. But the question is this a recession or is this something different? Because we're really choosing to put our economy in a sudden stop in order to protect our public health. That's a very different type of economic condition than really we've ever seen before.
Yeah, just to set the baseline, what was the state of our economy before COVID-19?
Well, I mean, we can look back to just a few weeks ago when we got the last employment numbers for the month of February, and we were surprised by strong employment growth, a low unemployment rate, and we were really reading the economy as really pretty strong. There were still some underlying issues, but overall, we'd been in this 10-plus year economic recovery from the global financial crisis. But even as we were receiving those numbers in the first week of March, we knew that things were going to look very different. And even over the past week, things have started to really look very, very different and very, very frightening.
I mentioned that numbers are starting to come out at the top. Looking at the data that we've gotten so far, what are the most concerning trends that you see?
Well, obviously, what everybody's talking about is the unemployment claims numbers that we got on Thursday. So they jumped by 70%. So we're at a 2-year high in terms of unemployment claims. And the scary thing is that those numbers are through Friday of the previous week. And we've heard from so many employers and state groups as well that we're really just seeing the flows happening to unemployment this week. And so we're really looking fearfully forward to the numbers that we're going to get next week, because it really looks like there's a huge shift in terms of who's going to have a job in the next few weeks.
Yeah, Amelia, you've been reporting out who this is impacting the most. What have you learned?
So I've been talking to a number of workers in different sectors and in sort of different financial positions who are being hit by the immediate effects of this. And one of the things that's just stood out to me immediately is kind of how broad a range of folks are being affected. Obviously, there are a few sectors where we've seen just the economy basically coming to a halt. So restaurants, the hospitality industry, the tourism industry is generally not doing well. You know, if you work for an airline, I've talked to several airline employees who have been temporarily laid off or had their hours cut back really significantly. And the issue is really that, you know, these jobs tend to have a few things in common. They're not jobs where you can work from home. They require in-person interaction. And often these are jobs that are not well paying to begin with. So they're people, you know, the people who are facing economic uncertainty, don't have an income for the next couple weeks, are not people who necessarily have a financial cushion to fall back on. So they're wondering, you know, I've talked to several people who are wondering, how am I going to pay my April rent? And they're also not people who typically have paid leave. So, you know, we can talk more about what some of the policy responses are. That's something that is starting to be addressed on a federal level. But I think the thing that's just really standing out is these are people who, many of whom are quite economically vulnerable. And the suddenness of it means that they've had no time to prepare. So one conversation that really stood out to me was I talked to one young man who works as a bartender, and he said, you know, last month I actually paid off all of my credit card bills, and I was really proud of myself for having done that, and now I wish that I had just paid the minimums because I wish I had that money in my bank account. So that's the situation that a lot of workers are finding themselves in.
Are you seeing any trends across ages? It seems like anecdotally I've heard that a lot of these more gig economy jobs are jobs that like younger people have taken up. Is that borne out in the data?
Yeah, so I had a piece on the site earlier this week with Ryan Best, who's one of our visual journalists, and we were looking basically at sort of what are some of the broad characteristics of the workers that are going to be hit hardest first. And they do tend to be younger. I didn't mention this, but I'm hearing also from a lot of independent contractors, freelancers, people who work in what we'd call the gig economy. And those people, you know, typically can't apply for unemployment insurance, so there's like a big question mark about how they're even going to get income replacement compensation during this time. They tend to either be quite young, or also this is a group that's a smaller category of the workforce, but it's quite worrying to see that the very oldest workers are also more likely to be in this position. So workers over the age of 65. And I've talked to a few, you know, older folks who work in grocery stores or who work as domestic workers, and they're basically going to keep going to work until someone tells them not to, but they're also in this higher risk category. So to be clear, they're a pretty small slice of the overall workforce, but that's sort of an especially worrying and vulnerable category. But yes, you're right, Galen, that young folks are also being hit quite hard by this.
Tara, there's a lot of different data points to look at when people are thinking about the state of the economy. We have the unemployment figures that we're starting to get out and that you talked about. There are the markets, there's GDP. What is the most meaningful at a time like this to look at in order to understand the state of our economy?
Well, I think we've got to think about two things. We've got to think about what's the most meaningful, but also what's the most timely, because a lot of the meaningful data that we would normally like to look at, I'm a macroeconomist, I like to look at those big numbers like GDP and unemployment rates and those sorts of things. But you know, these days, even the unemployment claims that we think of as being incredibly timely are a week delayed, and a week feels like months at this point with the data. And so with that in mind, I think we really are looking at all different sources to get a sense of what's going on. You know, this is where anecdotes do start to play more of a role, where information from metro areas, from state agencies, even these preliminary estimates are just being greedily grabbed and eaten up by people who are really trying to get a sense of where things are going. And of course, a lot of private companies have also been working on developing their own data sources. And I think people have really enjoyed working with the open table data that has been released, and people can see what's been happening in terms of restaurant reservations on their site. And of course, the site that I work with, Indeed, has been putting out information, particularly around job postings on their site, because that's something that can get updated every day. Whereas if we're looking at information coming from the government on job openings, that tends to come out with a 6-week plus delay. And that's just way too long to be able to get a sense of things. And what we're seeing from all of these preliminary data is a pretty big turn. And even just in the last week, both in terms of unemployment claims, in terms of job postings on the Indeed site, everything is just really shifting very quickly. In the Indeed data, we're seeing things that are really just slowing down dramatically. And this should be a time of year when a lot of businesses are ramping up their hiring. We've got all the college graduates, the high school graduates that are going to be coming in the market. They're starting to look for jobs. There should be all sorts of job openings coming online, and they're not there for lots of
what
different
have you
industries.
seen specifically in the Indeed data that sticks out to you?
Well, I mean, I think the most striking is, perhaps also the one that we've been most aware of is the directly affected. So thinking about, leisure and hospitality jobs. And that really, this should be a huge ramp up time of year, but instead, job postings have been flat. They look similar to January. And so that's a really big difference for people who would normally be getting work this time of year. But I should point out, too, that there are other groups that are seeing big gains. So if we look at what's happening for warehouse workers, for example, Amazon has done a big announcement that they're hiring a whole bunch because they're expecting there to be a lot of need for warehouse workers, for deliveries. And so far, grocery and those sorts of essential retail have been doing very, very well. And so we are seeing some shifts. And of course, there's going to be huge healthcare needs. But I don't know how we transition people who were hospitality and restaurants, leisure workers, and translate for them into being ramped up hospital workers when everybody is in emergency mode.
Maybe this is an impossible question to ask, but what are you expecting to see the next time you see jobs numbers? Like, just how bad do you think this could get?
I want to know, right? We all want a clear forecast, but to be able to make some kind of prediction about where the economy is going, we would normally base it on historical patterns or things we've seen before. And we haven't seen anything like this before. If we think about what kind of analogies we might want to do, right? So people would talk about, bringing together some of the biggest natural disasters, plus 9/11, plus the global financial crisis, plus now people are talking World War II. So if you bring all of those different analogies together, we don't know how to weight them and really be able to make a good prediction about what next month's numbers are going to look like, which is why we're all just grabbing onto every number as it comes to try and give us a sense. But this also depends on what the government response is going to look like in the coming months, because right now we're focused on those directly affected workers who are being laid off. But we have to also worry about those secondary spillover effects that can happen, where when those workers are laid off and they're not buying, then the other people that they would otherwise be buying from will lose their jobs. And that's where we're really watching very carefully to see how big those effects are.
According to reporting from the New York Times, the Labor Department asked states not to release specific numbers about unemployment claims before the national numbers come out next week. Why did they do that? Is that normal?
Well, so my understanding is that there's two different sets of numbers that are being debated about here. One is these very preliminary numbers, and another is like the state's more official releases. And so my understanding is that there is a concern about preliminary numbers being released if they haven't been vetted. And that's something that I am also concerned about. If we look at all the numbers, anybody who sees a bad number, which could come out for a number of reasons, there could be all sorts of volatility in the way that we're gathering data and in the way that information is coming in. And so you could imagine that somebody might say like, oh, wow, look at this amazing drop, and it could really spark fear. And then we find out that, oh, that's because it's an incomplete piece of information, and we actually do need the rest of that survey to be completed, and otherwise we're going to really undercount some people, and it might look much worse than we think.
So for anybody who's used to listening to us talk about polling in this podcast, in some ways we're still in the middle of the data collection period. The poll is still out in the field, and it's really just going to take some time before we get a full picture of what this all looks like. So, it is an interesting comparison to trying to collect, public opinion polling. Congress has passed one new law in response to the crisis and are now working on another. So, Amelia, what was in that first law, and what are they working on now?
So this is the kind of first wave of the economic response, and I think what we're clearly going to see over the coming weeks and months is that Congress is sort of dealing with this in pieces, because it's hard to get a political consensus around a lot of this stuff, and they're sort of trying to triage a little bit. So the first law was focusing on things like, how do we get emergency paid leave into place? There was also a provision that was providing emergency funds to states' unemployment insurance programs, which have been completely flooded with claims. We're talking about these numbers that we've been seeing. The practical effect of that is that the websites of state unemployment insurance agencies have crashed. I've personally talked to a number of workers who were laid off days ago and haven't been able to submit their claim yet because they can't get through on the phone lines. We've seen huge lines. Just the capacity of our unemployment insurance infrastructure is just not, this is an unprecedented scale, and we need to ramp up quickly. And so that was part of the focus of this first bill, was just getting a little more money to the states, or a lot more money to the states, to try to actually have the capacity to deal with this. The next wave is focusing on something that we've suddenly been hearing a lot about, which is direct payments to Americans. And this is something that is going to be at the center of the political debate. The Trump administration for a while had been advocating for measures like a payroll tax holiday. They seem to have kind of backed off of that. What I've heard from the economists I've talked to is that they were not that excited about something like that as a response, because it's a payroll tax, so it is not going to help anyone who has lost their job. And it's also something that sort of will have an effect over a longer period of time. And what we're really trying to do is figure out how to get, or what policymakers are really trying to do is figure out how to get money into people's bank accounts now, so that the people I've been talking to, can actually pay their April and May rent. So the Republican proposal that was just unveiled on Thursday includes one version of this direct payments to Americans plan. And it also includes some other provisions like relief for corporations, which is something else that is likely going to be controversial. And so I think what we're going to see over the coming week is just a lot of political debate about how do we get aid to individuals and businesses, small businesses, and then also corporations in a timely way. And that's something where, there kind of might be some political agreement, a little bit of bipartisan agreement about these direct payments, but even when you start to scratch below the surface, politicians are not necessarily on the same page about the best way to do this.
I want to dig in a little bit more into the concept of direct payments to Americans. But before we get into that specifically, broadly, Tara, what do we know about what the most effective solution is to a situation like this? We've mentioned repeatedly that this is unprecedented. So to a certain extent, I understand that we just don't know. But drawing on some of our past experiences, what would you say?
Well, there's two things that we're looking at. We're thinking about how we're going to help people who are hurt right now. And then we're also thinking about macroeconomic stimulus to prevent or at least lessen the medium to long-term impacts of what's going on right now. And those could be very different policies. But if we're thinking first about helping people right now, it really want to find out whatever is the most timely, politically possible way to get money into people's hands. And that seems to have varied somewhat, but this is where the push for direct payments to Americans really comes in.
Tara, on that point, is it a good idea to give everyone money, even people who haven't been affected so far? What's the argument for doing that instead of targeting it to people who specifically have lost their jobs?
Well, I think the issue here is we've got a trade-off between timely and targeted. And given the emergency situation that we find ourselves in now, that trade-off really matters. It's already hard for legislators to agree and put together a bill and get it passed and make those decisions. But then to identify and target particular people that are impacted, that adds another layer. And so if we're thinking about ways to get the money out there quickly, just saying all Americans is more timely. And there is a sense in which there's the potential for kind of addressing these inequalities later on in future packages and future tax bills. But for that timeliness aspect, anything where we're trying to narrow who's going to get the money takes more time to agree on and also takes more time to implement.
Sort of one of the arguments I've heard too for this kind of broad strategy of just sending checks to everyone is that we can kind of make some guesses about who's being most affected. But, we just had a long conversation about how fast this is moving, how we're not really sure what all of these numbers are. And so those guesses about who to target might be kind of imperfect. And what I've heard from several people I've talked to is we should be kind of erring on the side of maximalism rather than minimalism at this point. The risk of doing too little might be, greater than the risk of doing too much. And I would just add one more thing, which is that I've heard from other folks that I've talked to that, it doesn't have to be an either or. We can do the kind of, broader, less targeted strategy of sending checks out to Americans. And we can also think about how do we go about bolstering the unemployment insurance system so that it can better support the people who are, perhaps quite literally most in need of help because they are losing their jobs and therefore qualify for unemployment insurance. So, I think the checks has kind of emerged as like the shiny political thing that everyone is focusing on, but there are really a lot of things that I've heard in my conversations with experts that they're suggesting we should be considering, and it's not like we can only do one of them.
Yeah, what are the specifics of what's being proposed as far as direct cash payments are concerned, and what are the political sticking points, if there are any at this point?
All right, are there political sticking points? Yeah. So what the Republican bill or proposal that was just released is more targeted in these direct payments. So it has a phase out for people who make more money. So they, if you're on the higher income end of the spectrum, based on your 2018 income, you might not get any money at all. On the other hand, the people at the very lowest end, the people who don't have any income tax liability, which is quite a significant portion of the population, also get less money. They don't get no money, but they get half as much as the people who are sort of in the middle. And so that's the way that the Republican leadership is proposing it. There has been some criticism from within the Republican caucus about this. So some Republicans, like Lindsey Graham, are still questioning whether we should be doing direct tax payments at all. Other Republicans have been saying that this proposal is too regressive and we need to be giving more money to poor people. And then on the Democratic side, they also are saying, this isn't generous enough. One difference actually between what the Republican senators are proposing and what the Trump administration is proposing is that right now the Republican Senate proposal is just a one-time payment. And the Trump administration had proposed giving a little bit less money, but giving it in 2 installments. So it'd actually be, each payment would be less money, but it would be more money overall. And so that, I think, is going to be a sticking point too, is can you just do a one-time payment? Or, given that we have no idea how long this public health crisis is going to last, people might have to be out of work for a while. Does this have to be a recurring payment? And how does that affect, how much money we're giving people and how we're calibrating this? And does that need to change? So I think this is something that's going to continue to be debated. I do think there are some folks that I've talked to who have just said, the specifics at this point are less important than just getting the money to people quickly, because this is actually a thing we've done before. A tax rebate stimulus went out in 2008 because of the Great Recession, and it took about 2 months for those payments to go out. And I've been talking to folks about, whether we could do it more quickly. I've heard a wide range of responses and estimates about how long that would take. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Tara. But, if you're saying time is of the essence, obviously, the longer it takes Congress to actually agree on something, the longer it'll be before money is in Americans' hands.
Yeah, Tara, how are you processing all of these complexities that Amelia has laid out?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and I think that just adds to everybody's uncertainty, which for the macro economy is bad. That's bad for individuals to not know how much money, when is it coming, because even if they're not actually receiving the money yet, if they know it's coming, then maybe they can make a little bit better plans. Maybe they can be okay charging a little bit more to the credit card, knowing that some money is going to be coming to them, but not knowing when, what, how, all of those questions I think are very risky for individual planning, and then that aggregates up to the entire economy. That makes us all slow down and cut back on spending everywhere that we can. And when we do that, then that means that not only the people that are directly affected and are unable to go to work right now because of the virus, but all sorts of other people might be at risk of losing their jobs as well.
What's the ultimate goal here, Tara? Just to kind of have the government fill all the gaps in the economy for whatever 2 to 3 months, and of course I don't know that it's going to be 2 to 3 months that this might take. I've heard the government referred to as like the buyer of last resort in this context, just filling in, vast economic gaps, but knowing that it's going to be for a short period of time. Is that how people should be thinking of this?
Well, people are thinking about it a number of different ways. Again, since this is all new to us, we've got a bunch of different theories that are all, bouncing around out there, and we're all trying to figure out which one's right, and we'll probably be studying this for many years afterwards, arguing and debating. I'm really looking forward to when this is just a historical period that we're all, analyzing. But for right now, when
amen,
we're in
Tara,
it,
amen.
Yeah. But right now when we're in it,
we should be so lucky as to be studying.
Yes. But for right now, when we're thinking about, how do we take care of people now, protect the economy, make sure that there are jobs for people to go back to when we're able to go back into the economy. But also think about the fact that there are going to be some shifts that are going to go on, and we do want to reward innovation and people who are thinking about creative ways to still be working and producing in these difficult times. So we don't want to necessarily, freeze the economy where it was before the pandemic. We want to have some incentives for people to come up with new product ideas and new ways to work from home, new entertainment options, all of that. We want to still have those incentives in place while still preserving as much of the economy that we think we'll want to go back to when we're able to go back. And because this is also dramatic and sudden, we might have seen some of these shifts, moving to ever more technologically supported activities. We might have seen that slowly happening over 5 years, and we might see it all happen in 2 months instead. Is there a way through policy that we can smooth that transition for people that maybe in 5 years would have had to shift jobs, but now we're telling them you need to leave your job today?
Do you see this dramatically changing the economics of healthcare?
That's a tricky one. Again, early days, so it's still hard to see. But we do know that there's been a big push towards doing more telemedicine, even in the last few weeks, and that's been something that has been kind of that innovation on the horizon, using more technology for medicine. And there had been some slowness to adopt that. I think similarly in the education industry, I've seen that with my professor colleagues, where there had been a lot of pushback on adopting new technologies, in part because we were always busy, and I think doctors are always busy, and so investing in learning that new technology or investing in learning a new medical treatment, you can see why they would choose the medical treatment. But now that they have to choose, they're going to learn this new technology whether they like it or not. Are they going to continue to use it and see advances that way? I think so.
We've been talking a little bit about the economy on the individual level. You said that the second bucket here is macroeconomics. What kinds of things should we expect there? Should we expect bailouts? What are the tools in the toolbox?
Yeah, well, so this is where we've got to talk about the Federal Reserve. So we've been talking a lot about the role of fiscal policy, and that's particularly important when we're concerned about any distributional impacts and about supporting individuals, providing incentives for people to stay home when they should stay home. All those sorts of things are definitely in Congress's responsibility set. Obviously, providing sick days. All of that is something that the Fed can't do. But in terms of supporting the broader macroeconomy, and in particular making sure that this doesn't become another financial crisis on top of a health crisis, that's something where we've seen the Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world working incredibly hard, pulling out all the stops in order to try and preserve the health of the financial side of the economy so that we can borrow from the future. And that's really important right now because what we're hoping is that this is a temporary stop and that we can borrow from the future when we're going to be able to go back and participate in the economy more normally. And that should help us to be able to smooth out the impact and not have a long-lasting economic decline.
Amelia, what are the politics of all of these potential solutions? I guess not the sticking points between not necessarily the sticking points between Democrats and Republicans on the Hill, but more what the American public thinks. Do they like cash payments? I mean, you kind of assume that they would, but what do we see in the polling data? And, post 2008, how do people feel about bailouts?
Yeah, so I've been keeping an eye on the polling, and, I think listeners of the podcast will be familiar with this, but everything is moving very quickly, and so, the cash payments are not even in a lot of the polls that I'm looking at. They're asking about the things that we were talking about last week, and so I'm sure there were polls in the field that have questions about the cash payments, and we will know more about where Americans are on that. I will say I've seen one analysis from Data for Progress, and again, this is just one analysis, so we'll want to wait and see what other polls say, but they found that there was a big swing in support for sending checks to Americans from the beginning of March to just a few days ago. So on March 2nd, the idea of sending every American a $1,000 check was 15 percentage points underwater, so it was 33% of Americans supported it and 48% opposed. By March 17th, seen a huge change, 17-point swing to 58% support, so a solid majority, and 26% opposed. So, we'll see if that kind of swing is borne out in the the next round of polls. I will say the scope of the crisis means that I think many people are going to know someone who has been directly affected by this, and maybe wondering, even if I have the money for next month's rent, how am I going to pay the month after that? I think the impact of what we've seen in terms of the job losses and hours being cut back in the past week, certainly I think Americans will be very aware of what that looks like. So I wouldn't be surprised if people were supportive of sending checks. I will say in the polls I've seen also, there was generally pretty broad support for other measures like emergency paid leave of various lengths, providing free coronavirus testing, helping expand health insurance because that's going to be an issue for the parts of the population that are uninsured or underinsured, making sure that people actually will go to the doctor if they feel sick, and when we ramp up testing, that's not going to be a financial hardship. The one thing that I saw in a few polls last week was less popular were bailouts of various industries, airlines, cruise ships, tourism, hotels. And, one thing that you do see in polling from 2008, 2009 is that Americans just tend to be pretty skeptical of big bailouts of sort of, giant industries like banks, even the auto industry. So I would expect some of that skepticism to or I would not be surprised if some of that skepticism carried over. Of course, that doesn't mean that we won't end up bailing out some of these industries or, kind of helping them in various ways. But one thing that is getting some political discussion is trying to attach some strings to any money or loans that would be extended to these industries, that would sort of say, maybe you don't give executives a raise for a certain period of time, or, and I'll be interested to see whether, obviously I don't think like the average American is tracking the intricacies of these policy moves, so I don't know if that's going to make anyone feel better about the idea of a bailout, but that is certainly, one thing that could happen.
Yeah, at the press conference yesterday on Thursday, a reporter asked Trump if he was open to the government taking a stake in private companies that it helped with, bailouts or loans or things like that. And he actually said yes, which was an interesting development. I'm not sure how thought through that is at this point. But Tara, wrapping up here, what lessons have we learned from 2008, 2009 about the appetite for bailouts, the efficacy of bailouts?
Yeah, well, so the problem is that specifically when we're thinking about businesses that are being directly affected by the coronavirus, this is something where, if we're thinking about airlines, cruise ships, their business was fundamentally viable potentially until they were suddenly told to not have any more travel, and we were all told to not go on cruise ships and not stay in hotels and not go out to restaurants. Like all of these groups, their business model was fine. So that's very different than finding yourself in a situation where you're very over leveraged and then your demand drops and you get a bailout. Like that type of bailout, I think there was a lot of frustration on the part of the public for those, even though from a macroeconomic standpoint, in order to preserve jobs at these large companies, that might have provided some benefits. But on the other hand, today, do we expect that we will be going back to these businesses, that people will go back to working at them? And maybe this case is very different, and bailouts make sense in this case, again, to preserve those jobs and preserve those companies so that the economy is there when we're ready to go back to it.
Yeah, and I mean, I just add to that, Tara, that I found a couple polls from 2008 when we were sending out these tax rebate checks that even then Americans actually didn't think they were going to be that helpful, and they were not necessarily that popular. And so I think, obviously there are lessons to be learned from what happened in 2008, 2009, but I think the public's response to something like this, where literally we are telling people do not work, I mean, it's just so unprecedented that I think, who knows what we'll see in terms of how people respond. I think it could be very different this time. If
we're able to take care of the economy and everything looks good on the other side of this, then there might be a lot of complaints about policy overreaching. And yet it might be exactly that extreme measure that did make things okay on the other side.
It's fascinating. We keep talking about how this is unprecedented, and so to a certain extent, looking at data sets, policies from past experiences don't help. I mean, Amelia and I were talking yesterday, like, okay, well, in another situation, you might expect a jobs program, but what kind of jobs program where people have to stay 6 feet away from each other, and a jobs program in the middle of a time when a lot of the jobs that were lost is because the government is asking people to stay in their homes? It's just so difficult to try to think through anything that compares to this moment.
Well, and I think that's one reason why the policy response is so complicated too, because like even our unemployment insurance system is set up to kind of try to get people to go back to work. That's one reason why unemployment benefits do not replace your entire income, because the idea is it's sort of like a bridge between losing a job and finding another job. And so I've talked to several economists, there's obviously a lot of debate over this, but, I've talked to some people who have said we need to be replacing people's income at a much higher level because we want to flip around the message we're sending to people. We are saying to them, do not look for other jobs. We don't want you to go out and get, whatever part-time job you can get right now. We want you to stay home. And so that, I think that is just important to bear in mind, that a lot of the ways that we think about policy responses they're just different right now in this moment.
Although if we do go that route and we end up being relatively long-term in this sort of structure, we may still want to have some incentives for people to be creative and find ways to work even during these difficult times. And so it is hard to figure out, like, if we're talking about just a few weeks versus a few months, that might be a really different set of incentives that we want to set out for people.
Right. Well, and that was one of the things Galen and I were talking about yesterday too, is sort of like we're also facing, what appear to be shortages of crucial medical supplies. And so, do we want to figure out ways to get people out there actually producing the things we need in a sort of, wartime sense of like, we really want to ramp up certain industries. So I think that's just, I don't know. There's like a message of this conversation. I think it's just everything is uncertain and everything is in flux, and we kind of have to see what happens over the next couple of weeks, and there are going to be multiple policy waves of responses to this, partially just in response to that reality.
The good news is that our listeners are not strangers to the word uncertainty, and I think that's going to be a theme of a lot of the conversations that we have going forward, and we're definitely going to keep checking back in on the data that we have about the economy and the political response, but let's leave it there for now. So thank you, Tara, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you, Amelia.
Thanks, Galen.
My name is Galen Druk. Tony Chow is in the virtual control room. You can get in touch by emailing us at podcasts@538.com.
So in this video, I'm going to give you an introduction or basic overview of calculus. We're going to go over topics like graph and functions, the parent functions, some examples of transformations, limits, continuity, derivatives, and integration or antiderivatives. So those are going to be the main topics of this video. It might be a very long video, but it's going to give you a nice introduction for those who are taking calculus and for those who want a quick review. Now, for those of you who may want to find more videos on calculus, you can check out my channel page, because this video won't cover all the topics. There's a lot more. It's just going to give you a brief overview. So check out my channel page if you want to find more videos. I do have more videos on algebra, trigonometry, pre-calculus, chemistry, physics, and organic chemistry. You can also check out my website, video-tutor.net, as well, to find more videos and playlists. So let's go ahead and begin. Now the first function that you need to know is y is equal to x. It's a linear function, and it's basically a straight line. The next function is y is equal to x squared. This is a parabolic or a quadratic function, and it looks like an upward U shape. It looks something like this. The next function that you need to know for calc is y is equal to x cubed. Now what do you think the parent function for this graph looks like? What do you think about it? I'm going to write up another one. The next one is the cube root of x. X cubed is an increasing function, and it looks like this. The cube root of x looks very similar to x cubed, but simply just rotate it. It's an increasing function, but it looks this way. Towards the end, it becomes horizontal as opposed to being vertical. Now here's another two examples for you. What about this one? Y is equal to 1 over x. And also, y is equal to 1 over x squared. What do you think the parent function for these graphs look like? 1 over x is an odd function, in the sense that it's symmetric about the origin. 1 over x squared is an even function. It's symmetrical about the y-axis. So whenever you square a number, the result will always be positive. That's why this side is above the x-axis and not below it. And as you can see, the right side is the mirror image of the left side. So there's symmetry about the y-axis. Now what about this one? Y is equal to the square root of x, as opposed to the cube root of x. The square root of x function looks like this. It's a function
30 years ago, the Berlin Wall was torn down by the people that it had divided for 3 decades. Berliners were euphoric. They were euphoric because the Berlin Wall was not merely a wall between East and West Berlin. It was the wall between East and West, period. It was the division of humanity into 2 different camps, and since names and labels are always changing and morphing, not to mention carrying decades of emotional baggage, let's reduce it to the most simple, emotionally neutral terms. On one side of the wall, the eastern side, were the collectivists, who believed that society takes precedent over the person. This collectivism was advertised as new and scientific, but the fact is that collectivism has been the default condition of humanity since humanity began. No, the actual newcomer to this clash of visions were the individualists on the western side. The first government in history dedicated to the idea of the individual being more worthy of protection than the state had just turned 170 years old when the 40-year conflict known as the Cold War began. With the world in ruins after the defeat of Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and Fascist Italy, these 2 ideologies had come into head-on conflict here in Berlin.
It quickly became evident that Soviet leaders were not interested in a free, unified Germany and were determined to induce or force the Western powers to leave Berlin. Certainly, the American and Western people do not want war, but all history has taught us the grim lesson that no nation has ever been successful in avoiding the terrors of war by refusing to defend its rights, by attempting to placate aggression.
From the east, the collectivist idea known as communism had slugged its way for mile after bloody mile, limping, then striding, and then running across Eastern Europe from the Nazi high-water mark at Stalingrad. The individualist ideology arrived by sea, storming ashore on the beaches of Normandy, and after being staggered once or twice, was racing across Western Europe in a gasoline-fueled Red Ball Express. Now, part of this idea was known as capitalism, but that was merely the economic system. Politically, morally, economically, and practically, these were called the forces of freedom for the simple reason that that's what they were. And as the collectivist nightmare known as German National Socialism wavered, collapsed, and then imploded, these 2 antithetical
Today is a very, very, very important and special day. We're going to be talking about a topic that is very current and very important, and that is racism. And I have 2 incredibly special people in the studio with me today. My 2 son-in-laws, Ellie and Jay. And I am so honored and privileged to be their mother-in-law, and they are amazing, incredible men, and they have achieved so much in their lives, and I cannot tell you how proud I am of both of them. And they have they've taught me so much. And when it comes to this whole concept of racism, I couldn't think of 2 better people to talk to. So welcome, Ellie and Jay.
Thank you.
I'm so pleased to have you guys with me today. It's such an honor. Very, very special to me, and thank you for being prepared to talk about a very difficult topic in this very crazy time that we're in. So can we start by each of you just telling us a little bit about yourselves and your background? So if we can maybe start with you, Ellie?
Sure. So, I am an LA native. part of my family is originally from Nigeria, but I was born in Los Angeles, and I've lived pretty much my whole life in the Southern California area. Graduated from college in Southern California as an engineering major, and then got into the tech field with a variety of different companies. And then, a few years ago, I met my soon-to-be wife, Jessica, and we got married in September 2018. And then just a few months ago, we moved up to Seattle, Washington, for a new job opportunity at a tech company up here. So that's where we're at right now, trying to, keep things going.
And we were just with you this weekend, and we were watching the riots literally from your building. Yeah. So we've been immersed in that, right? As this has been happening, we've been seeing.
Indeed, it has been live. It has been. We've been witnessing the situation live. It's not just been on TV. It's been outside of our window. So it really is a real experience for all of us.
It's very, very real. This, Jay, tell us a bit about you and your background.
Yeah, so I am born and raised in Ohio. I spent, I want to say, about 22 years there. I've always been a bit of a tech geek and a quiet kid. But when I was 22, I made a last-minute decision to move to Arizona to kickstart my career a bit. And from there, for the past few years, I've spent working with different organizations, large or small, and leading IT departments across various states in the U.S. Most recently, I took a position at a company that is international and made the move over to New York because of the state of the world that sort of took me and us back to California, where it's a bit more comfortable, but luckily I'm a family man. I've got a husband, and I've got 3 fur babies.
I got grandbabies.
Yeah,
fur grandbabies.
Yeah, and I live a good life. Life is good.
Oh, well, I just take my hat off to both of you, because you both have had experiences that none of us can actually relate to, and it's just it's that's what I wanted to share today, is how do we. Let's talk about your experiences. Can you talk about your lives and your experiences as African American men? What that means, what that looks like living in the US today, where we supposedly are not supposed to be racist.
Yeah. Ellie, do you want to start, or I can jump in?
I mean, yeah, sure. I'll start. I mean, I guess for me, well, obviously both of us have unique experiences, because not only are we, Black men, but we're, successful Black men, and we've lived in environments that are not necessarily the same as a lot of Black men experience, but we still have had experiences that are unique to Black men. And for me, I guess the most visceral experience that made me realize that racism is a thing was, being arrested or handcuffed at gunpoint in high school. Now, for most of my life, I lived in mostly white neighborhoods, because my parents could afford to, unlike many Black families. And most of these neighborhoods, really were about, equality, and respected me and didn't treat me any different than anybody else. So I didn't experience a lot of overt discrimination in school or in my neighborhood. But so it came to my first real encounter with police that I felt the first real sense of discrimination. And that was in the 10th grade, when I was waiting outside school, waiting to get picked up by my mom. And I see a fight across the street, 2 Black guys, and it looked like some white and some Mexican guys were fighting with each other. And eventually the Black guys ran away. Police came a few minutes later, and I'm watching this from the opposite side of the street, wondering what's going on. Then one of the police cars drives the wrong direction across the street towards me. The 2 cops out of the car, and they say, "Freeze, get your hands up." And both of them pointing their guns at me. And I'm just like, I was just like in a complete state of shock. I thought maybe they thought that one of the assailants was over next to me, but no, they were pointing at me. And so I immediately, instinctively, put my hands up. They said, "Get down on the floor." I got down on the floor, and then they came over and put my hands behind my back, handcuffed me, and then put me in the police car. And I'm just thinking, is this like a movie or something? I can't believe this is happening. And then from then on, they start driving around the neighborhood asking me, oh, do I know what's happened? I'm like, this is insane. I'm not involved in any games. I'm a freaking honor student. My backpack is still like sitting there where you guys, pull me off the ground. I have no idea what's going on. I couldn't even speak at the time. I was in such shock. But they had it in their mind that I must be involved because I'm Black and I was near the scene of the fight. And so then, they pulled over to where two of the victims in the fight were and asked them, oh, does this guy look familiar? And thank God they were honest and said no. And so then they let me out of the car and said, hey, we're gonna unhandcuff you now, and basically yelled at me to get my hands on the car. So they unhandcuffed me. And then they said, like, now do us a favor and get out of here. And that was the end of it. It was like, it's like one of those things that you see in like those crime dramas, but you don't think it's really happening to you. And like at that very same moment, my mom comes to pick me up, and I tell her, or rather my stepmom comes to pick me up, I tell her everything that happened, and she's just like, it's just blowing her mind. And it just was really a wide open world wide open welcome to being what it means to be a Black adult, really. And so, I guess for racism, that's like when I think about it, that's what I think about. That's what I thought about when, in the murder of George Floyd and everybody's response to that. And then looking at the cycle of police violence over the decades with whether, it's Mike Brown or Philando Castile or so many names that have not been atoned for. And it just reminds me that I could have been one of those names and no one would have remembered me because there was no video evidence to prove what really happened. I have no doubt that the police would have said, oh, he was reaching for a gun. If I made a sudden move, they would say, he was reaching for a gun, or we thought he had a gun, blah, blah, and then, my name wouldn't not be remembered by anybody. So I guess on the tech side, that's one benefit that we have of living in 2020 is that we're all armed with the ability to record what police are doing. And I think that's why a lot of these stories are coming out. It's just revealing, pulling the sheet away from what's always been happening. So now everybody can see that this is not right. It's not right.
I listen to that and my heart's like palpitating. The fear that you're living under, that constant fear, and what could have happened. I mean, when that whole George Floyd thing went down, my first reaction was this could have been one of my son-in-laws. It really hit home. And just the other night, Ellie, when you were actually moving your bike in because of the protests, and you went downtown to go and see what was going on, Jessica and I were both freaking out that don't go there. And she was texting you to come back. This is we are your mother-in-law and your wife, and we were panicking. We can't even begin to understand that you guys are living under this constant threat. This is no words to even process what you've gone through.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Justin, do you want to talk about your?
Yeah, for sure. Before it's okay. Before, let me know if this video is coming through because you guys got choppy for a second.
Oh, did it? No, it's coming through perfectly. So Jay, tell us your experience.
Yeah, so, I think a large part of my life, I was really unaware, be it, blissfully or sort of ignorantly unaware of how different, I was to everyone around me. I mean, very much like Ellie, I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood, and it didn't really register to me because it's all that I knew. I knew that my skin was different from my friends, at an early age, but I had friends. We went out and we played and everything was just fine. What I came to realize sort of as I was getting older is that, I would have all the rules that all my friends had to abide by. And then when I went home, I would have a second set of rules that my mom would let me know that I had to follow to make sure that I was safe. And I just did so, right? I knew how I should address, an adult or if I saw a police officer, what I should do, or how I should act when I'm in a store or in a public setting to make sure people don't view me in a specific light. That's how I spent majority of my life. And I follow that, because just that's what you do. You pay attention to your parents and you be a good kid.
Yeah.
And then sort of as time went on, I think the disparities became a little bit more prevalent. I grew up, we certainly were not affluent as a family. My mom was a single mom. She supported 3 kids and she did a great job at it. But I got to see like how different, my life was from a financial aspect from the rest of my friends. And that was largely based on opportunities that were presented to our family. And then taking it even a step further, I remember one day my mom had a conversation with me because I had 3 best friends at the time. And she said, I'm happy for you and it seems great, but just be on the lookout. If you ever make one of your friends upset, they may say something to you that you don't want to hear. And I thought, I don't know what she's talking about, and that probably would never happen to me. These people understood me. They were my friends. And lo and behold, one day I pissed off one of my friends while we were playing, I don't even know what. And then they dropped the N-word and called to me, and I was sort of taken aback. And it was the clearest indicator that there was a difference between me and them with that single word. And then from that point on, I think the rest of my K through 12 experience was really just feeling like another, like outside the mainstream. I spent a lot of my time in my high school years sort of looking in the mirror and sort of thinking that my own appearance was not, what somebody else would want. I felt ugly. I used to spend my time in the mirror daydreaming about what plastic surgery I was going to get done to my face to make me look, more Eurocentric, basically. And then you sort of you do that, and your self-esteem is sort of broken down. And then as I started to take on more adult responsibilities, right? I got my driver's license. I got a job. I started making money for myself. The disparities became clear. I mentioned this in my blog post. I've been pulled over, at least 12+ times before. Never been given a speeding ticket, but I can tell you the multitude of reasons why living in a neighborhood that is predominantly Caucasian, when you're one of the only African American or people of color in the neighborhood, makes you look suspicious to law enforcement officers. I've been pulled over because I was told my taillight was out and it wasn't. I've been pulled over because I was told that I was speeding and I wasn't. I've been pulled over because I was told that I simply looked nervous when I was driving, which I probably was, with a cop behind me. I've had a car full of friends where we've all been forced out of the car and had the car searched with multiple dogs and all been, searched for no reason, just because. And, I think part of my experience and what I imagine is part of the Black experience is you've got that sort of tough exterior. You've got, the resilience, because, this is something that is going to happen to you. And this is something that you just need to, sort of prepare yourself for and move on, because you still have to live a life and you still need to be successful. I could go on. I think there are a million other examples that I could as well. But, skipping forward into my adult life, I think the biggest thing that I've always realized is people make a concerted effort and have made a concerted effort in my life to make me feel like I'm, just like everyone else. But the concept in the word microaggression has become something that is very, that I've become very aware of in my later adult years now, because you see the differences, right? I'm a vice president of technology. I've been working in IT for 16 years now. And what I found was, not ever being a part of that small group. Everyone talks about the boys club. It applies to you if you are a woman. It applies to you if you are a person of color as well. That boys club is filled with, white men, and not looking like or sort of assimilating into that culture, sets you outside of it, and it caps the amount of success that you have. So you can just imagine how hard it is to sort of climb and attain sort of what I have. So I'm rambling, but basically.
No, you're not. It's very relevant.
Yeah, and so basically this has been life. So the last part that I do want to mention is when you think about finding a significant other, when you think about finding a spouse, like or someone to love and who loves you, that has been a journey in itself. I think because I didn't necessarily know if I was cute or not until I went to college. I remember someone wrote on my dry erase board outside the door, like, "Oh, I think you're cute." And that was the first time I'd ever heard it in my entire life from anyone in the world. And it was, it was wild. And you go through this whole sort of process where you doubt yourself, and you have people who are not only fetishizing you because of the color of your skin or who you are, but also people who are judging you and wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole because of the same reason. And it's very exhausting as well, trying to figure out where you fit because you come from a predominantly white neighborhood, so you don't act like what people think Black people should act like. But at the same time, the very people from the place where you come from also don't want you. So that has been, a challenge as well. So, I've been very, very fortunate, very blessed to find someone who loves me, and I'm very happy with that. To sort of round it up and end it off, when I see what's happening in the world right now, I'm really sad to say that it doesn't surprise me, because elements of what's happening are things that I think both Ellie and I have experienced firsthand. Thank God, not to the fullest extent that unfortunately many people who have experienced injustice through the legal system or directly from police officers have, but things that are happening every day. So the thing that comforts me is that now I feel like people are paying attention. Now I feel like people can see it because, like you mentioned, technology is being videoed. It's not something that can be argued, and they want to do something about it. But it's clear and it's nothing new to us. And there's a part of me that's very skeptical, yet hopeful that there will be change. Is this going to be just another hashtag that goes on for a couple of weeks, dissipates, and then things go back to normal because there's less effort to continue what we're doing? Or is this something that's going to actually change? And I honestly don't know. But that's me.
You said so much there, both of you. That's just, there's things like you said, things like mental exhaustion. From living like that, being hopeful, but also skeptical if this is going to last. How Ellie, it wasn't filmed, so you could have just disappeared. I mean, how many haven't been seen? You both said things like it's, you've been, now we can hear through technology, but it's like that to hear your story, to actually hear what about all the how many hundreds of thousands that haven't been seen and haven't been heard, and how do we keep this going, this awareness that is brewing at the moment and coming to a head? How do we take this and keep it in our conscious minds so that we can move into the future and finally start changing this? Before we dive into that sort of area, I want to just talk about the mental health aspect, the mental exhaustion that you must be living under, because constant pressure. I mean, you guys know that I do mind-brain research, and I look inside brains and I look at what is happening when we're under constant stress. And I know that a person anxiety is a normal human experience. We all have it, and it goes up and down. But being in a constant state where you're constantly on edge, where you have to be on edge all the time, like living in a perpetual state of on edge, that doesn't do good stuff in the brain. And for mental health, can we talk about that? Do you feel like you live like that? And if you do, what does it feel like, and how do you manage it?
That's an excellent question, Caroline, and I really appreciate you asking it. I feel like for me, I don't, even though that the incident I previously described was really intense. It's not something that I've carried with me like a burden, where I'm always looking over my back. And maybe that's just because of my personality, or to not hold on to things. But at the same time, there is this, the concept that always does come to my mind from time to time that, like, what is freedom? That's the freedom that white people can have to demand change in their government. It's not exactly the freedom that Black people can have. And one thought of mine in the past is, people talking about, okay, well, look, if you've been pulled over unjustly, there's actually, if you actually look at the law, there's things you can do to be able to contest, a police officer who's trying to harass you, basically. But those tools, even though they may be legal, they're not really accessible to Black people, because as soon as somebody who's Black is going to, say something that might upset a police officer, you never know what's going to happen next. So I would never try anything that I'm even legally entitled to try half the time. So I guess that's for me, that's the consciousness that I think of in terms of being nervous or being anxious about, what it means to be Black in a community that doesn't understand you, or it doesn't understand your experience. And I feel like that, but that being said, I've been super blessed, and I really feel bad for a lot of Black people who live in underprivileged communities, who live in the projects, who live in the ghettos, and have to get pulled over, multiple times every year for no good reason. Or in New York, the most horrible thing is this whole stop and frisk policy in New York. Is like, forget about driving while Black, it's just walking while Black. And cops are gonna come up to you and make you basically strip search you in the middle of the street for nothing, And now it's come out that the cops have come on the record and said, yeah, we're told by my superiors, Black men 14 to 20, those are the ones you need to stop and frisk, and there's quota systems around that. It's like I'd feel like I was in a zombie movie if I lived in Brooklyn or something, and so I really feel for the people that are in those circumstances where they really do have to look over their shoulder every 5 minutes because they don't know who's coming after them.
I mean, just to mention that you mentioned a quota system, that there's a quota system for how many to frisk at a certain time. I mean, this is that's dehumanizing. That's to live with that. I mean, Jay, you moved to New York and then COVID hit and you moved back to LA now, but you were there and you couldn't get out. But how did you feel? Did you in New York? All over. I mean, I'm sure it's everywhere. This is not just a New York thing. That's an everywhere thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about New York and then I'll answer your question as
the
well.
mental.
So being in New York was obviously a brief experience, and I'll certainly will be back. I mean, that's my employer is there. The thing that was different about New York is that I probably saw a cop a block. It's very different. It's a very condensed city. You hear sirens on a daily basis all throughout the day. There are folks who are homeless or individuals shouting in the middle of the street. It's just a different culture entirely. And I imagine, just to be completely fair, that the individuals out there, like the cops and just regular people, are constantly on edge. There's no way not to be. There's just so many noises and smells and things. It's extremely overwhelming. So though I was not sort of subjected to any type of direct injustice while I was there, even people around me would mention, oh man, like that cop was staring at you, and that person was staring at you. I think people look in fear, not only because I love to walk around in hoodies and snapback caps all day, but just because I think everyone was on edge. And I think that really sort of leans into what my overall life experience has been. I mean, I think by and large, I want to give credit to my mom, because I think everything that she did, from the day I was born and on, was set to give me as many tools as she possibly could on her end to make sure I was set up for success. My legal name is what it is. I think because, my mom wanted to make sure, and I know because we've joked around about this, wanted to make sure that if my name showed up on our caller ID or on an application, that someone wouldn't immediately turn me away, unjustifiably. And that's a real thing. The way in which I speak, the way in which, I carry myself, especially in a professional setting, I learned from my mom, and these are the things that have allowed me to be successful in life. I cannot tell you the number of times to this day I hear, oh, you are so well-spoken. Oh, you are so eloquent. It just happens. And one end, like,
it's almost insulting though, but it's almost insulting in a way, isn't it?
It's almost because on one day, I want to say thank you because yes, I am. And,
Yeah.
And then secondly, you want to say like, what made you want to say that to me, as opposed to the many other people that I'm sure are around you who speak in a way that is just as eloquent as I, if not more. So those are the things that make you feel a little uncomfortable. But to Ellie's point, I live, as far as I know, for now, one life, and I'm trying to have the best one that I possibly can. So you try not to hold on to these things so close to the chest on a daily basis. Like, I want to enjoy my life. I want to enjoy the sunshine, the things I have to do, the things that I've been fortunate enough to have. My mom taught me at an early age to be grateful for the blessings that I was given. That not everyone who had all the same opportunities that I had, and of course the people who did not as well. So I try to live in gratitude and just not have that stuff focus on me. But there have been situations where you feel that sense of dread immediately, and you're either sort of quickly reminded of the color of your skin in a way where it's like, man, it's really like that, or in a way which terrifies you. I mean, I still get nervous when I'm driving and there's a police cop behind me. It's instinctual now to think, what reason now am I going to be the next person, who I've seen on the news, either be assaulted or murdered for reasons unknown. In addition to that, you go into a store and you see someone, glance at you in a way, and only you, in a way, because they worry, and you have to think of what are the things that I can do to sort of diffuse the situation. Let me say a couple of words to this person and greet them so they know that I am safe. Once they hear my voice and they hear that I'm friendly, I've seen plenty of times, I'll see someone look me in the eye, and if I'm not giving them a happy smile, you can tell they're on edge. We went for a road trip a few days ago, just up into the mountains. I'm terrible at geography, and we stopped to go and get coffee, and I wanted to get an ice cream, and it was an area that was probably 100% white. And when we walked out of the car, we were both wearing the same thing, sweatpants, hoodie, and hat. Boy, that whole scene could have frozen, and everyone stood and looked at me, because I think they were thinking that I was about to pull out a sign and start protesting and looting the area that they were in right now. So that's just the life that you live, or that I live, and that I think a lot of people.
But they didn't look at Jeffrey. Sorry to interrupt you. They didn't look at Jeffrey, but they looked at you.
Yeah. I noticed immediately while people were talking. They all were talking, and their eyes went straight to me, and they just sort of followed me. And everyone got really, really silent to see what it is that I was going to do, if anything. And they watched me until we got back in the car and left. And that's just life. Now, there are plenty of situations where that doesn't happen. I think, we're both lucky enough to live in an era where people who are our age, by and large, I want to say maybe, don't exhibit those behaviors, on the outset. But internally, it's those little things that make you feel like you are an other. So that's just been life.
You said something there, both of you said things that have really touched me, and I know touching everyone, but you said this is life, but it shouldn't be life, because what you've both described are situations where there's difference shouldn't be a value judgment. Statement that I often make, and it is they're making difference a value judgment, and you've both kind of indicated in different ways that you almost, your identity is being questioned, who your value as a person has been questioned through the color of your skin by just people looking at you, the way that or following the police, following you, you're driving, you're going to work, you're going to dinner, and you feel on edge when there's a police car behind you. But I'm not going to feel that. And people have made value judgments. So this is why you have to talk, and this is why we have to share your stories, because we've got to keep this in conscious awareness, because you guys know that the work that I do with the brain, that if something is in the non-conscious mind, you can't change it. And that's what white privileged people have to do. We have to bring into consciousness what we don't even think is there. Because so many times we'll think, oh, I'm not racist. I've got 2 African-American son-in-laws and whatever. But there's stuff. I grew up in apartheid South Africa, where when I was a little girl, there was black and white toilets, black and white beaches, there were signs. That's what I grew up with. And I came against that system as a young adult and worked in those, as you know, I worked in those systems for 25 years, trying to change the systems and but I saw the results of racial discrimination. I saw what it did to communities. And now, I come to America and I'm seeing exactly the same thing. It's just like, it's more, you said earlier on, it's more like passive aggressive, but it's not as, it's passive aggressive constantly, but and then there's these explosions that are constantly happening. And that's got to change. It's time. I mean, and unless something's conscious, and that's why I'm so grateful for this season, which has made us aware. I'm grateful for technology. I'm grateful that we can talk. I'm grateful that you two can dig down deep like you are and bring up very painful experiences. We need to hear everyone's stories. We need to keep it in our conscious mind, because science shows that only when something is conscious, when you bring that thought that's physically structured into your brain, when you bring that into your conscious awareness, you can then change it. And there's been times when my own 4 children, and you married to 2 of them, have said, hey, Mom, that's a racist statement. I didn't even know. And that's what we have to do. If I think of myself and everyone who's white, who's listening to this, we need to not just think consciously. Yes, consciously you may think you're not being racist, but what is deep down inside of you? What are the cultural, structural, societal norms that you've grown up with that are imprinted in your psyche? Those need to come up, and we need to dismantle those one at a time. And we can't do that if we're not conscious, if we're not listening with empathy.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We have to listen, but sometimes the first part of listening is asking the question, because most people are not comfortable talking about the experience they've had. In fact, what I just told you about being arrested at gunpoint, most of my friends don't know about that. It's not like, oh, I'm afraid to tell anybody. It's that partially it's not on my consciousness all the time. And secondly, I don't want, I don't want to make people feel like I'm, behaving like I'm a victim, because I don't see myself as a victim personally. But when you ask me, well, then now I'm going to bring it up. We're in this environment where, of course, it's on my mind. Then I'm going to bring it up because it needs to be said. And so I think people need to ask more questions of who don't understand. They need to ask the questions, and people who do understand need to speak out about their experiences and have the courage to be like, yeah, this happened to me. It's not just an outlier. It's not just a random act of violence. It is a way of life. And now you need to know that it didn't just happen on TV, that your son-in-law experienced this, your friend, your classmate, your brother, that guy that you knew for years, that was just like you, but he's Black. Well, he's not just like you because he has totally different experience that you had no idea about. And so I think that's what we need to get comfortable with that.
We need to get. Go ahead, Jay. Go ahead, Jay.
No. Yeah, I was going to sort of mirror that and simply say, what we see in the world right now, isn't just people of color, Black people, and allies, getting enraged simply because of George Floyd. It's because of years of watching people, be murdered unjustly, and going peacefully about. Reposting a hashtag and a photo and bringing awareness and hoping for justice, and it not coming again and again and again. And now you've got people who are just like, I'm tired of talking about this with you. I'm tired of trying to explain it peacefully. I'm tired of you telling me that I'm not, raising my voice or protesting in the correct way. I'm upset, and you're going to have to hear that. So I think, there definitely needs to be some understanding from people who not only are not aware of what it is that's going on because their privilege or their own experience has allowed them to, to not have to experience it, taking the time to understand what that difference is, and then also taking the time to try and empathize with people who are, who have lived this experience for their entire life, and try and recognize how they feel, and sort of take it from there. Because, at this point, we sort of popped the top, and the state of the world is what it is. And, we're looking for some justice, we're looking for some real change. But that dialogue, when we do have an opportunity to have it, really needs to be one of, listening, to people who have these grievances and have this hurt inside them, and try to understand it from their perspective.
Very good. Both of what you've both said is incredibly good. And you know what? When you think about, you pop the lid in terms of the brain and the mind, thoughts are real. So the thoughts that I've grown up with that have been imprinted, the experiences that you've had that have been, and these years of racial injustice, and not just, as you say, it's not just George Floyd and these few people we've mentioned, it's years and years that these, and this is coming through the DNA. This is generational. This is epigenetic. Thoughts are real. You can't push them down. They have a volcanic nature. And at some point, they will explode. So we are seeing the pain of generations exploding. And we are in you two both being IT gurus, literally. This is actually an ideal age that we live in to spread this, to keep this thing alive. We have a distinct advantage in this time now to make a difference, because there is a shift culturally. There is a shift in awareness with the younger generation. There's a definite change. There's much more of an awareness, but there's also the opportunity to keep it alive, to keep the flame burning like the Olympic flame keeps burning. We also can use the COVID example. How quickly did the pandemic take over the world, and the whole of humanity for the first time in history were globally facing the same common enemy over literally within a few days. So if we can take the virus as an example, how quickly all of humanity had this focus on one issue, why can we not do the same thing with this? It's in our consciousness. We can just as quickly make people aware and work towards solutions in exactly the same way that we're working towards solutions to solve the COVID crisis. This is a crisis that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of history that we can change if we keep it. So we need to keep this thing going like the virus, to change it, to find the solution, the antibody, the way through. I have to bring science in. I'm sorry, boys. You know that.
It's okay.
The way my brain goes. But I mean, it's true between technology and the concept of the virus. We've seen evidence that overnight you can get global attention on something. Overnight you can get all of humanity focused on something and work towards solutions. How do we leverage that?
You want to go first? No,
I'm throwing it out to you.
No, I think one thing that I feel is important is to not be reactionary, to be honest, because I feel like when we're in an environment where we're reactionary, we're not putting our best foot forward, because the situation that we're reacting to or has the first move advantage already. And so I think one of the reasons that movements like the Civil Rights Movement, and the movement of nonviolence and civil disobedience was so successful is because in that time period, obviously black men were dying all over just like they are now, but they didn't say, "Oh, a black man died. This is horrible. We need to go protest it." They took a step back and said, "Okay, this is happening. This is not just a flashpoint that just happened last week. This is happening all the time. It's a continuum of racism and violence.
It's a pattern."
Yeah, it's a pattern, and it's a constant thing. Instead of trying to pick at one thing or another, instead of trying to respond to one act of violence or another, let's focus on systemic situations, and let's have the first mover advantage, which is what they did with the SCLC and their coalition of religious leaders who decided, okay, we're going to put our bodies on the line, and instead of us being triggered by the police, we're going to trigger them. We're going to plan these protests not right after somebody got attacked, but we're going to plan them on our time, on our grounds, and we're going to go out and force the police to respond to us in a way that makes it abundantly clear that we are in the right. So when they did that, and everybody, even if you weren't alive at that time, we've seen in school the pictures of police with fire hoses and dogs beating up peaceful protesters. It was impossible to ignore what was happening, and that's what allowed the segregation to really become so unpopular that even the KKK didn't want to do it anymore. So that's just the thought that I've had for a while of like, how can we, instead of always be reactionary, which it's hard to be organized when you're reactionary, but when you create a plan that's based on the situation and then execute that plan, then then the other side has to react, and they are more likely to wither and fall because they can't withstand that.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So what you're talking about is being proactive, and proactively keeping this, not just waiting for this to die down and these protests to die down, and then we do nothing until the next explosion, and then there's another.
Well, that's what I'm afraid of. And that's what I'm afraid of is, I mean, I hope that, the riots and the looting, calm down. I mean, like most people, but as far as the peaceful protests, I wouldn't be surprised if those calm down too. And frankly, we go back to the situation where, so-called allies are more focused on, Dancing with the Stars or what the latest pop star is doing again, So that's why I feel like that we have to reorient our mindset into how we deal with this situation and make it be a proactive instead of reactive thing.
I love that. I love that you say that we should have planned peaceful protests. We should follow the models that have worked, and we need to keep it in the public conscious mind constantly, so that this doesn't keep continuing. You have to keep those same patterns, proactive patterns, running.
Yeah, and the idea that I think we're supposed to defeat the idea that it's not just there's this common idea about people who don't understand that Black experience, that it's just there's a few bad cops. A bad apple did this. He got arrested. He got fired. He whatever. The problem solved. I'm certainly glad that in very quick time compared to other cases that the old officer has been fired and the one officer has been charged with murder. That's great, but that's not the solution. That's why people are still protesting.
Exactly.
And people are taking that to a much more violent level, because that's not what we're here for.
It's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid on a wound that is still festering. We've got to address the cause of the wound.
It really is. So that's my thought on that.
And both of you have written incredible blogs. I've actually got them printed out here because I wanted to make some comments and ask some questions about them. But I recommend that all the viewers go to my website, drleaf.com, and go and look at the blogs that both Jay and Ellie have written. They are amazing. And I wanted to actually ask you some questions about some of the things that you've both said in your blogs. But before we do, Jay, did you want to say anything in terms of the proactive idea, or anything in terms of what Ellie's just said?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I wanted to say, and I want to take my time with this so I say it correctly, is, when everything first started, when it came to the protests, which turned into, very aggressive, sometimes violent protests, which sort of evolved into looting, and now, we've got the police sort of, fighting back essentially when it comes to protesters, was, I had the same reaction, which was, there's no way that we're going to solve this problem if we are out here breaking things down and looting and doing this and that's not the way. And then it was through sort of continuing to see the posts where you got to get the reasoning why, that I started to open my mind up a bit. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating for that type of behavior on a regular basis. What I am trying to say is I understand why it is people have gotten so upset. I understand how things could escalate to that. And then if you look at other nations, other cultures, other countries, I mean, we all love going to Paris and in France. And when the people there want to get something done, they protest. And things, windows get broken, some stores may get vandalized and things get taken, and the government pays attention. And they make a change, because it appears, of course, there's a civil way to go about doing all things, but there's a certain time where, sitting down and having a meeting and waiting for someone to take what you're saying, seriously, it feels like it's hitting deaf ears, and it feels like it's taking too long. So, what's the quickest way to get a bunch of people's attention when you're in a room, break something? Everyone's going to turn around to see what the heck happened. So I understand it, is what I will say. But I do think in the long run, things are going to have to happen twofold. I agree with Ellie. What we do is, as Black community and as allies of the Black community, people of color, is going to be to remain consistent and organized. Listen, there are a lot of us who became overnight activists when it came to this specific issue where we hadn't been speaking about this. And I think we all three, listen, we've lived our lives and done what we could, and we feel like we've been good people, but we certainly weren't posting about this issue, which was absolutely going on beforehand.
Exactly.
And I think that's a fair assessment. I judge myself against the exact same thing.
Exactly.
Because part of it is out of sight, out of mind, and the other part is what I went back to saying before was I want to live a good life. Like I want to be happy, and do I personally feel like I want to become a lifelong activist? And I don't know if I have that answer, but I do think if this problem is going to be solved, it's going to have to remain at the forefront of people's minds and remain consistent. Whether you want to go and have a peaceful protest, whether you want to throw your dollars at a solution, or whether you want to do what we're doing right now by having those conversations with people so they can become more aware of their mindset and become allies, or just become aware so when there are situations they understand a bit more. That's what we can do. So I think the solution to this is not going to happen overnight. When these protests end, and they will at some point, and we go back to our lives, there will still be an issue with prejudice and discrimination and injustice in the United States and in the world. So I think, really what we're going to have to do is make a plan long term. But what I am happy about is I have friends and colleagues who simply are telling me that they had no idea that this was my experience after they read my article. I'm sure the same thing will happen to Ellie if it has not with his article. And just making people aware, so when they look at a situation, through the glasses that they've been wearing their entire life, that they can look at it and go, well, maybe this is not what his experience is. Perhaps that can be a start for them to sort of make a change in the future. So that's what I'm hopeful for, at least. But it'll take much more than that, and I don't want anyone to sort of quote me and saying like, let's just wait and be slow about it. But I definitely think it's going to be a long-term process.
Well, any change starts, and we all know that. I mean, change is small little steps at a time, but cumulatively over time, huge differences can happen. And just from a scientific angle, I can tell you that even in a 3-week period, you can make major changes in your brain. So we could, I right now, I'm going to throw a challenge out there to all my white friends and family and whoever's white out there. I'm going to put up a whole series of educational posts teaching people how to dig down into your non-conscious mind and to actually do the hard work of seeing what non-conscious racist thoughts and patterns you actually have, and pulling those to the surface and doing the hard work of dismantling them and actually reconceptualizing them into the right way of thinking. I mean, this applies to all the work that I do with mental health. This is a toxic mindset. Racism is a toxic mindset, and it is causing brain damage. So if you've got that inside of you and you think you're not racist, but you're white, you are privileged, and you may not be consciously racist, but you are white. So you can walk into a store and like Jeffrey and Jay walked into a store, and Jeffrey's white and Jay's black, and they looked at Jay. That is a mindset that we have to dismantle. We have to pull that up, and we have to do that hard work. And white privilege, we don't want to do that. It's time for us to start doing that. So I'm going to put a challenge out there. I'm going to give you the tools to be able to do that. Everything I teach on my page is about dealing with our toxic issues, dealing with our trauma. And this is a toxic trauma. And let me tell you from a scientist point of view, and I do this research, I'm a brain scientist, that when we have a toxic thought, we are damaging our brain. So us not dealing with this stuff is actually causing a toxic damage in our brain. You can't sit on the bylines. You either are anti-racism or you are for racism. So if you're not doing anything anti this toxic mindset, you actually have a toxic, damaged brain because you're just sitting on the fence. You can't be a bystander. That is causing brain damage. So don't think you're not affected. Every person who is not operating as a decent human being, reaching out there and valuing every human for who they are and not seeing differences of value judgment, you are causing brain damage in your brain. And this is not acceptable. This is not something that we can keep on perpetuating through the generations. This is something that we can proactively do. And that's something within 3 weeks I've shown with my research and neuroplasticity, and there's many other areas, scientists that research in this field of neuroplasticity. But you can change a mindset. And when we change our mindsets, if you do collectively, if there's thousands of us, and I challenge you, I have thousands of people that are listening to this and watching this now. We can get this video going viral. I challenge the thousands to become hundreds of thousands, to become millions, to change your mindsets. Because as we change our mindsets collectively, as we do the work, we come together, and then we can have these discussions. But we don't have to wait, this is such a hopeless thing. You can start today by starting to change your mind. You can start today by starting to listen to the stories. You can go and read Ellie and Jay's blogs. You can go and see what's going on out there in social media. You can dig down deep. If you're defensive, if you're feeling defensive, if you're feeling that you have to justify what you're hearing now and getting angry with what I'm saying, just the mere fact that you're justifying shows you that you've got some sort of issue there that you need to deal with. We're talking about human lives here. My son-in-laws walk into a shop and they get targeted. That is not acceptable. That is something that is sick in society, and we can change that. We don't, on top of all the other big changes that will be made, it starts first with a thought. Whatever a person is doing, whatever action they're performing, whatever glance they throw in the direction of my son-in-laws has come from a thought that they have first built, that has come from a thinking process that has been built through the culture and the environment. And when we look at ourselves individually, we can start changing that. So that's my challenge to all of you out there, and we will help you through this challenge. I don't know if you boys want to comment on what I've just said.
Yeah, I just want to say, no, I totally agree with that. And one thing I was thinking of is, one of my hobbies and passions is sailing, which is, ironically something that only mostly white people do. But the bottom line is that, I really understand more and more about your analysis of the brain, and it does seem to me like it is a sailing ship, in that you're out on the ocean. You're always moving somewhere. Your brain's always changing. There's no, you can't drop anchor in the middle of the ocean. Your brain's going one direction, it's going another. And when it comes to this issue of racism, there is no neutral ground. There is no anchor. If you're at the helm, you can't not be at the helm. You can't say, I'm not racist. But if you're not directing your ship towards or against racism, then your ship's going to drift. And it's gonna end up in an environment where you call it apathy or ignorance or whatever. It's still supporting racism. Mm-hmm. So we could not consciously support it. And it's not to say I'm not, and I don't want this message to be seen like, look, white people should feel guilty for being white. That's absolutely wrong.
That's a value judgment too.
Or like this is all your fault. It's just being conscious of who you are and how the world is operating. Be conscious and dig deep into yourself to understand how you can do better. And the same thing for me as well, because to be honest, no matter what skin color you are, you can have biases against people. You can have biases against yourself, against your own skin color. And sometimes, I make prejudgments against people because they, look like they might be, the stereotypical thug, to be honest, and so I have to change that on myself to respect people and actually try to understand them before I make a value judgment. So I think that's something we can all learn from, no matter what color you are.
That's excellent. Yeah, Jay, you want to say anything?
I think I would just say, prejudice is something that is going to exist forever. I mean, you look at something and you will make a judgment on it. It's how we operate in the world. It's how we sort of try to make sense of the world around us at all times. I think it's what we do in those moments when we're making quick judgments that are going to have an impact on how others are treated and how others feel in the world. And I think that's a hard thing to do, because the first thing that you need to do as an individual is look internally and say to yourself, what are the areas in which I'm making quick assumptions about? What are the areas in which I assume someone's behavior when I don't have any personal experience on it or with this type of individual? I can't tell you the number of times that I became the exception to the rule for people whose family had never had a Black person in their house before, or who had a Black friend before. And then their whole entire world opened up when it came to that, and it's sad to say that, those are the sort of things that need to happen, but I feel like people need to expand their horizons and their minds and go and experience and get get to know the fact that, folks, aren't exactly what you think what they are in their mind. Another example, I went to prom with a girl whose grandfather was extremely racist. She told me ahead of time, and, everything that happened thereafter, was a clear indicator. I took her to her prom, and he wouldn't get out of the car when we were taking photos with the group of, I think, 30 other people. When the pictures went up, she told me that he cut out my portion of the picture and covered up with another frame. Yeah, and that's just something that as I was 16 at the time that I just had to sort of deal with. But there was one day where he came over her house while I was there, and she asked me if I wanted to leave, and I just didn't feel like it. And he came in and we had a conversation, and I think we talked about sports, of which I know nothing about. And we had a civil conversation, and then I ran into him again and we had a civil conversation. And then, after a while we were having friendly conversations, and it was fine. So I think it works. It works both ways. I became the exception to the rule for him. Because not only I wasn't looking at him as an immediate aggressor who I needed to sort of prove a point to, and he eventually, wore down his preconceived notions about who I was based off of the color of my skin. Now, every situation isn't going to be like that, but what I am saying is that it is proof that if you put yourself in situations, your mind may change about an individual in the end.
I love that. So what you said there was key was the conversation. So once you'd gone past the bias of the color and you got into conversation, it changed things. So this is the importance of conversation, because if you haven't had, how many times, as you already said earlier as well, do we make an assumption about someone, then we talk to them and realize, oh my gosh, I was so wrong, and so that's what we need. That's another pattern that we can bring in to continue this. Once things calm down, is we could have conversation challenges where we get people talking all kinds of ways and manners of getting conversations going between different races that are sit and have a coffee, community, whatever, the coffee conversation, whatever, as well as the protests that are peaceful. So there are some very basic things that can be done besides working on our own mind, conversations, peaceful protests. These can make a difference, and they're doable.
Yeah. In respect, out of respecting each other, respecting the fact that someone else may have a completely different opinion, and hearing them out and being open to the fact that you just possibly may be wrong or misguided in your thought, or that simply may just be their experience, and sort of going from there. I think it takes a very brave person to sit in a room. I don't know how many Black people would be willing to sit in a room full of people who identify as racist, and I don't know how many white people who have inherent biases against people of color or Black people would feel comfortable, one, identifying that they were those people to begin with, and then two, sitting in the room with those individuals and having a meeting of the minds. I think it takes a special type of person, but those are the types of people that we need to make this conversation happen.
And we can have those. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's a really cool story you just told, and obviously I had no idea about that either. But you're absolutely right. It takes that willingness to be uncomfortable and for a good cause. And, whether it is standing up, picketing, or whether it is talking to someone who already has a preconceived notion that you're lower than them. That's just really cool that you did that. And like you said, even as a teenager, no, I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to try to get to know him, know me. That just reminds me of a story that I think everybody should look up, which is this Black man called Daryl Davis, who's now become well known for attending KKK rallies and befriending these racist members. And up to 2017, he convinced over 200 KKK members to get the roads just by talking to them, getting to know them, befriending them, showing them that he's not the enemy. He's made so much change as one person. So, and I think we all have that potential to make a difference by being willing to be uncomfortable, have uncomfortable conversations,
Yeah, and I just want to throw in 2 points.
Go. No, please. This is amazing. Go.
I think 2 things, because the first thing that someone, I'm sure, who heard my story and heard what you just said is going to say is, it's not my responsibility to make someone who has a prejudice against me more comfortable with me being around them. And that is a valid point to make. Why is it my job to have to do that? Someone should be able to, meet me halfway, or simply just not have those thoughts at all. And that's also a valid point. All I'm saying is, if you are an individual who is willing enough to take that step, that is one single path in which the conversation could start. An alternate path could be being in the position of the person who has the biases, and making your own self uncomfortable and challenging your own beliefs about individuals who may have prejudices about, and making the effort and doing the work as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I know if I was listening to this, I would say, well, hell, it's not my job. So yeah.
And you've raised two very valid points. We can do the work ourselves, and yes, it may not be our job, but as humans, we need to start talking. We need to have conversations, and I think that if what may make it easier to have a conversation when you think, hey, it's not my job to convince you. No, it's not your job to convince you and to have expectations. I agree with what you were saying then, how people will feel that. But at the same time is, if we agree to disagree, but we have a conversation about agreeing to disagree and finding, but there's probably something we can agree on. So we're not coming in, I'm not trying to convince you, you're not trying to convince me. I just see you as another human. Can we see each other as humans and have a conversation? Then there's, what you choose to do with that afterwards is entirely up to you. You can walk away more racist or less racist, or more angry or less angry. But at the end of the day, it's a choice that you have to make, bearing in mind that if you are constantly angry towards other people, even if they don't change, that anger that you keep in you is damaging you. So it's damaging the victim and the victimized in that situation. So we could literally start a challenge of have a conversation, get uncomfortable, be prepared to agree to disagree. We could get a campaign going where people communicate and start talking.
Yeah,
but I feel like
uncomfortable combos.
Yeah, me too, for sure. And I feel like it's something that I've thought about for a long time, to be honest. So I'm glad that you guys are bringing it up. So essential to peace and unity. And it just reminds me of the fact that this goes back to, what it means to be human, and what it means to be, to make progress in your own mind and your own spirit, in terms of what you've shared with your audience regarding how they change their mind, or how they change themselves physically and health-wise. It requires you to be uncomfortable. Yes. So that, almost any triumph requires you to be uncomfortable. But then once you get to the other side, you're so glad you did it. Just like, we were talking about, Wim Hof and that method, all of that, you have to just breathe in all that. And at first it's kind of weird at first, and you feel like you're out of place, uncomfortable. But then, you get over that hump and you're like, I achieved something out of this. This is awesome. Let me do it again. So I'm sure for Jay, when he, the reason he's told the story is because something good came out of it. And that's why we're all here, right? We want something good to come out of the difficult times that we have with each other.
I love that. And we need to, it's like another analogy is a surgeon. I've got so many surgeon friends, and they always say to me, you have to cut you up to fix you. So you have to go through the pain to cut you up, fix you up, and then you've got to go through the healing. And what we've created is a culture of, I don't want to feel pain, just take a tablet, take it away, push it down, and then things keep hidden. And then when things are hidden, that's the societal breakdown as well. It's not just in racism, it's in mental health in general. It's just, you got to get a label, get a drug, and push it away. But it's all part of being a human. We've got to embrace depression and anxiety and the mental health things that come. I mean, that's depressing what you both have experienced. It's anxiety provoking what you've experienced. To have someone who doesn't want you in their home, or someone who's driving behind you, or someone who looks at you funny because of your color of your skin, that creates a level of anxiety. But if we're talking about it, as you say, if we go through the pain, if we do that surgery, we'll get through the other side, we'll get through the healing. So what we have to do is keep the pain in the forefront. We have to keep the pain in the forefront.
Yeah, I think a challenge that I would love to sort of give to people who are looking at, the protests and the things that are happening in the world right now, and they're going, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe these people, these thugs or whatnot are doing these things out in the streets. Think of something that would happen in your life that would bring you to a point that would make you angry enough where you would want to break something. Okay. You know, if you lost a loved one, or if you felt as though, you know, some injustice had, you know, sort of befallen you or someone that you love, and there was nothing that you could possibly do to change that, and what happened was sort of irreversible. You know, think of that and try and understand, you know, just like we just mentioned, what would bring someone out there to do these exact same things? What would bring you to sort of break, you know, break a glass, or go and challenge a police officer, or go and shout at the top of your lungs that injustice is happening and change needed to happen now? I think that would be the challenge that I would throw out to people. Because if you think about it like that, you know, you think, okay, you know, if it could be me in any scenario, you know, and for me, the things that, you know, would always bring me up in arms would be if something happened to my husband, or if something happened to my mom, you know, my family. You know, what are the things that would sort of drive me up to mania? And those would be the things. So I understand, and I really sort of implore people to do the same thing, and just sort of to go back to what Ellie said about the individual who was, you know, went to KKK rallies. I think we all must realize, and this sounds incredibly cheesy, that like at our core, we all just want to live a good life. We all just want to pay our bills and go on a vacation, have food on the table, laugh with our loved ones, and live a good life. I think no matter what, you know, socioeconomic background you come from, no matter what color of your skin, you just want to live a good life. And I think that's why it's so easy to find commonality with people of any race or kind. So once you take away these invisible make-believe barriers that you feel as though separate you from another person, even your traumas, which may be very real and very concrete, you will find at the core that we are very similar. So I feel like if you challenge yourself to put yourself in a position where you can have these conversations and be a little uncomfortable and get a little scraped up, like you mentioned, Dr. Lee, then, you know, what's going to come out of it is like, oh, like these people are way more common to me than I thought.
You could call me mom.
Finally, I wasn't sure this whole time. I wasn't sure.
That was amazing. What both of you just said, your two separate conversations was two separate points that you've made is so important, because you're stressing the two things. You're stressing empathy, which is so much part of our humanity, and from once again brain science research, we have not got wiring in our brain for hatred. There's no wiring in our brain for racism, for toxic. We're literally wired for love. All our neurotransmitters, our circuits, we gear towards empathy and towards love. So when we operate, that's what, as you say, that's our most fundamental need as humans. Is every movie, every story, it's always about the love at the end of the day, the love story that breaks through the trauma, that's what really draws us in. So it's true, we all know that. It's not brain science, we all know that. And so to empathize, to develop our empathy, we kind of have stamped out a little bit of empathy is natural, but our individualistic lifestyles and our almost narcissistic lifestyles have kind of stamped that out, where we're not putting ourselves in other people's shoes. And interesting research shows that when you're in a bad place, like racism has put Black people in a bad place, reaching out and trying to have these conversations like you did with your prom partner's grandfather, okay? Yeah. Prom date's grandfather, was you going in your place of almost brokenness, you reached out. And research shows that when you reach out from a place of brokenness and you help others, you improve your own healing and functionality by up to 68%. So if we have us all doing the mind work, it's the mind, your decision to do what you did that day, to do what you've done, it's all driven initially by what are you thinking, it's driven by the thoughts that you're thinking. So if we get our minds changed, we can start changing how we move forward with those things. So empathy is a huge part of it, and take away those invisible barriers. So I love what you both said. I mean, it's just everything. It's just incredible.
Yeah. One real quick thing. One thing that I do think that I've really loved, what I've seen the last few days, is, you know, aside from all the videos of police attacking protesters and rioters attacking police, there have been the videos of protesters coming up to police line and asking the police to kneel.
Yes.
Saying, hey, look, you know, having personal conversations with the police or whoever the head is there and saying, hey, we will kneel if you will kneel. If you kneel, police, we will actually go home. And that's happened in multiple cities where police have actually gotten down on their knee on the line with the protesters, and then the protesters went home.
Amazing.
I think that, in the midst of all this craziness, there's that beauty that can be replicated and set as an example of how to treat each other. And I think that that's something we can hold on to and possibly use as a driving force for real change, for understanding each other, and for bringing peace.
I love that. That's incredible. Well, there's so much more we can discuss, but I would like to raise something that I think is a very relevant topic, and you've both kind of touched on it in your blogs. But why do we have to focus at this time on Black Lives Matter? We all agree that all lives matter. Our whole conversation has been also referring to the fact that obviously every human love, etc., and connection, and take away those invisible barriers, and honoring and respecting all the different colors, and bias goes both ways, and opportunists occur in every culture. That's not the issue. The issue this time is Black Lives Matter. The best analogy I heard this week, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, and there's been so many, the one I'd like that helped me understand it the best, or explain it the best, was if there's a fire in the street and the fire engine comes along, because one of the houses is on fire, the fire engine comes along and puts the fire out on that house. It doesn't mean that all the other houses don't matter, but it means that at that moment, that house is on fire. And that's what we have at the moment. At this moment, Black lives are on fire, and we have to focus on that. And then we can, as the other houses come on fire, we can deal with those. But at this moment now, we need to deal with a house that's been on fire for too long, and it's time to put that fire out.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I was going to use an analogy as well that I sort of more identify with. Everyone at some point in their lives have been to the emergency room. And when you go to the emergency room, everyone is there because they have an issue, right? Maybe you have a toothache, or you've got a temperature, your arm's in a cast, and there's some sort of issue. You are in need as well. Everyone there is in a need at the moment. But then someone comes, busts in the door, and they're bleeding, and they collapse on the ground. And then you see the people from behind the emergency room rush out and take them back. All of a sudden, you who've been sitting in line for 2 hours now, they're skipping ahead of you. That is what I think about when I think of this issue. It is an emergent issue, and it is something that everyone needs to pay attention to. It's not negating the fact that you too may have problems. We all have problems. We all have things that we have to deal with. This is a serious issue that is not being solved, that needs immediate attention from people. So yes, absolutely, Black Lives Matter, and we say it because we feel as though they have not been honored in the way that they should be, in the way that other lives have been, and it's an emergent crisis. Okay, that's my new favorite analogy. That's an excellent analogy.
It's a great one. It's a great one.
Yeah, that really hones in on the issue.
Yeah, I think that the semantics of that has been really overplayed and to the detriment of us all. But specifically, all lives matter. We all agree that all lives matter. This is so ridiculous to have a debate about that. We don't even need to talk about that. It's talking about, like both of you just said, what's the emergent issue. And I do feel like, one group that's having a lot of challenges is the Christian community.
Yeah.
They, for a lot of them, they don't understand what many Black people have to deal with, especially in the local community and, communities that are predominantly white. They think, look, we love, God is love, and we love all of you. So why you hate us? Why are you attacking? Why are you doing all this? Or why should we focus on Black Lives Matter? We thought everything's cool. But I think even in the Christian faith, there's specific examples that reflect what the concept of focusing on the Black struggle. And I know some of them that we've discussed recently were, the parables of Jesus, losing one sheep out of 100, or the parable of, a shepherd losing one sheep out of 100. He spends all day and all night finding that sheep.
Yeah.
And when he finds it, he's like the happiest man in the world. Or the prodigal son, where the son goes away, it gets involved in all sorts of stuff, and there's basically almost dies, and then comes back years later, and the father is so happy, so cheerful, throws a party for this kid who went and ruined his life, and the son who stayed home and did everything he was told and was so great, it's so upset and feels so jealous. But it's not about, we need to focus on where the problem is.
It's so good.
Identify the problem, let's solve it together.
I agree with you. And in terms of the church, the church needs to wake up and also read the history, the structural racism that's actually wired into a lot of the church history in the United States and across the world. But there's some really, really good books out there that will explain that this is there's a lot wrong that has just come through and been accepted and not questioned. So.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, like everybody idolizes, lionizes Martin Luther King now, but back when he was doing his thing, most churches were opposed to him. Even many black churches did not want to be involved in civil disobedience. The white churches were on the other side of that many times. So the idea that somehow, well, I believe in God, so that means I'm righteous is complete garbage. You need to look in yourself, realize, are you really doing what's right? Are you really embracing the fullness of what that is? And does that mean, and sometimes that means going outside of yourself and seeing people who are different than you, and being what the real example of a good Samaritan really is.
Exactly. What does love look like? That's a question we've got to ask ourselves. What does love look like? Not rules and marginalizing people and if someone is suffering pain emotionally and physically from a belief system that you have, there's something wrong with your belief system. We need to question those foundations of that kind of belief system, because God is love. So that's a really, really good point. Ellie, you also, I want you just to give a couple of those stats from your blog, if you don't mind. You like, it's amazing. We were discussing this over the weekend, and you put this in your blog about like the recent Stanford study. And can you pick up on just a couple of those stats? Because
it's just funny. It's just okay. So real briefly,
it's just great. Yeah.
So, just in response to everything that's going on, we're talking about writing a blog post. I'm like, what am I going to write about? I was just so stressed out about everything, and then I just thought about, let me.
Now your mother-in-law asked you for a blog.
Yeah, I was like, I gotta dig deeper into this if we're going to find something that I can really get passionate about. And that's when I discovered, okay, everybody talks about, black people are being targeted by police. Is that a real thing or is that not? Is it just perception or is it reality? Is it because black people are more likely to commit crime, which is what a lot of conservatives say, honestly, or is there something actually substantial to that? And then I just did some simple Google search and found these studies that are showing, yes, black people on average are more likely to get stopped for traffic violations than white people. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's really happening. But even inside those studies, it's showing that when white people are searched, they're more likely to have illegal drugs, weapons, and contraband on them than the black people. So when you're talking about trying to stop crime, it makes no sense for the statistics to be what they are. But that's the way they are, and that's the evidence that explains why so many black people feel like they have been harassed their entire lives, because it actually did happen.
So, and then talk about the traffic fines, how these quotas. I mean, it's unreal.
In some police departments there are quotas, which is like I mentioned earlier with stop and frisk. But in some police departments there are quotas, whether they're specifically, you need to get a certain amount of tickets or you need to get a certain amount of fines. There's performance incentives. Because quotas is too political. There's performance incentives around a lot of policing, and there's no doubt about that. And even without those incentives, there's still the financial benefit to a lot of cities and towns and counties to get all of that traffic money in. All of those violations for such simple stuff like not using your turn signal or crossing over a double yellow line, and you pay $100, $200, $300 fines. Well, if you're a poor black person, you can't pay those fines. You're gonna end up having to, either accept the payment plan or, see the fines increase every month, or get an arrest warrant. Like I mentioned, the guy from Lando Castile, one of these, that was the black man who died. Multiple times he got arrested for having a suspended license.
49 times, wasn't it? 49 times.
49 times he was pulled over in 13 years. Many of those times he was pulled over and cited was not that he was doing anything wrong, it's because he had a suspended license for something else that happened months ago. Or he had a warrant out for his arrest. It's like, oh, was he a criminal? What did he do? Oh yeah, he drove around with tinted windows. So the police cited him and he didn't fix it in time. And so now there's a warrant out for his arrest. What the hell are we doing arresting people for because they didn't pay a traffic fine? This is ridiculous.
When they've got a broken tail light and they haven't got the money to fix it, and they get nuts.
It's ridiculous. So I'm like, maybe we should dig deeper I wanted to try and find some substance that people could appreciate and actually respect, even if they have not experienced this for themselves, and so that, and help them realize this.
Hello, tech community. Welcome back for another live conversation. It's a big one today, as big as they get. When we created this Build Back Better series, our thought was, how could we address issues arising out of the pandemic? How could we imagine building back from that? But the events of this past week, the horrific death of George Floyd and the daily protests that have followed, they've provided a new urgency, which we, of course, simply have to address. Can we build back better from this? I think before we can even start to answer that question, we just have to seek to understand the immensity of this moment.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. Right now, so many people in the United States and beyond are grappling with feelings of anger and frustration, deep sadness, and really helplessness. No matter who you are, you have questions about what to do now, how to make things better. And as we've seen violence like this unfold for many, many years, what is the path forward?
So, we're joined today by a group of activists, organizers, and leaders known for their crucial work in social justice and civil rights. We're so grateful to have them here to engage in a discussion about racial injustice in America, the unbearable acts of violence against the Black community that we've witnessed, the dangers to a nation riven by anger and fear, and how on earth we can move forward from this to something better. So first, each of our four guests will share their thoughts on how we move forward from this moment, and then we'll engage as a group, including you, the tech community.
And we'd like to thank our partner, the Project Management Institute. Their generous support has helped make today's interviews possible. And of course, as Chris mentioned, we want you to take part in the conversation. So please share your questions using our Ask a Question feature and continue to share your thoughts in the discussion today.
Thanks, Whitney. Okay, let's get moving. Our first guest. Dr. Philip Atiba-Goff is the founder and CEO of the Center for Policing Equity. They work with police departments across America, including in Minneapolis, to seek measurable responses to racial bias. Phil, I can scarcely imagine how distressing the last week must have been for you. Welcome, and over to you for your opening comments.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, this week has been a gut punch to anybody who felt like we could be making progress in the way that we put forward public safety that empowers particularly vulnerable communities. We started working in Minneapolis about 5 years ago. At the time, it was like most major cities in the United States, a department that had a long history of unaccounted for violence from law enforcement targeting the most vulnerable Black communities. And we try to put into place a number of things that we know work. Change the culture so that the culture can be accountable to the values of the community. And what we saw was small, but measurable progress. We always knew, with small and measurable progress, that you're one tragic incident from going back to ground zero. But the events of the last week and a half haven't brought us back to ground zero. They've torched ground zero, and we've dug a hole that we have to dig ourselves out of. What I hear from police chiefs who call me, from activists I talk to, from folks in the communities that are literally on fire right now, I hear folks saying, I had one activist say to me, that the pain that he was feeling was too large to fit into his body. And without thinking about it, I said right back, that's because it's too large to fit into a lifetime. What we're seeing isn't just the response to one gruesome, cruel, public execution, a lynching. It's not just the reaction to three of them, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd. What we're seeing is the bill come due for the unpaid debts that this country owes to its black residents. And it comes due usually every 20 to 30 years. It was Ferguson just 6 years ago, but about 30 years before that, it was in the streets of Los Angeles after the verdict that exonerated the police that beat Rodney King on video. It was Newark, it was Watts, it was Chicago, it was Tulsa, it was Chicago again. If we don't take a full accounting of these debts that are owed, then we're gonna keep paying it. Part of what I've been experiencing in the last week and a half, and what I've been sharing with the people who do this work, who are serious about it, is the acknowledgement, the soul-crushing reality that at some point, when things stop being on fire, the cameras are gonna turn to something else. And the history that we have in this country is not just a history of vicious neglect and targeted abuse of black communities. It's also one where we lose our attention for it. And what that means for communities like in Baton Rouge, where those who still grieve Alton Sterling, and in Baltimore, for those who are still grieving Freddie Gray, is that there is not just a chance, there's a likelihood that we are a month or 2 months out from this with no more to show for it than what we had to show after Michael Brown Jr. And holding the weight of that, individually and collectively, is just too much. It's just too heavy a load for a person or a people or a generation to hold up. What we're seeing is the unrepented sins, the unpaid debts. And so the solution can't just be that we fix policing. It can't be only incremental reform. It can't be only systems of accountability to catch cops after they've killed somebody. Because there's no such thing as justice for George Floyd. There's maybe accountability. There's maybe some relief from the people who are still around who loved him, for his daughter, who spoke out yesterday and said, "My daddy changed the world." There won't be justice for a man who's dead when he didn't have to be. But we're not going to get to where we need to go just by reforming police. So in addition to the work that CPE is known for with the data, we have been encouraging departments and cities to take the money that should be going to invest in communities and take it from police budgets, bring it to the communities. People ask, well, what could it possibly look like? How could we imagine it? And I tell people, there is a place where we do this in the United States right now. We've all heard about it, whispered. Some of us have even been there. Some of us live there. The place is called the suburbs, where we already have enough resources to give to people so they don't need the police for public safety in the first place. If someone has a substance abuse issue, they can go to a clinic. If somebody has a medical issue, they've got insurance, they can go to a hospital. If there's a domestic dispute, they have friends, they have support, right? You don't need to enter a badge and a gun into it. If we hadn't disinvested from all the public resources that were available in communities that most needed those, we wouldn't need police in the first place. And many have been arguing even more loudly recently that we don't. If we would just take the money that we use to punish and instead invest it in the promise and the genius of the community that could be there. So I don't know all the ways we're going to get there. I know it's going to take everything and. It's going to need the kind of systemic change and the management tools that we traditionally offer. And it's also going to need a quantum change in the way that we think about public safety. But mostly, this isn't just a policing problem. This is the unpaid debts that are owed to Black America. The bill is coming due. And we need to start getting an accounting together so we're not just paying off the interest of the damn thing.
Thank you, Phil. Rashad Robinson is the president of Color of Change. It's a civil rights organization that advocates for racial justice for the Black community. To date, more than 4 million people have signed the petition to arrest the officers involved in the murder of George Floyd. And of course, one was arrested last week. Thank you so much for being with us, Rashad. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's an opportunity that I'm taking today to just tell you about how you can get involved, how you can take action, and because right now strategic action is critical for all of us to do the work to change the rules that far too often keep the systems in place that hold us back. Make no mistake, the criminal justice system is not broken. It is operating exactly the way it was designed. At every single level, the criminal justice system is not about providing justice, but about ensuring that certain people, certain communities are protected while other communities are violated. And so I want to talk a little bit today about Color of Change, about activism, about the work that's happening on the ground from other organizations all around the country, and the way that you can channel this energy. What we talk about at Color of Change is how do you channel presence into power. And far too often we mistake presence and visibility for power. Presence retweets the stories of the movement. People feeling passionate about change can sometimes make us feel like change is inevitable, but power is actually the ability to change the rules. And right now, everyday people are taking action, and what we're trying to channel that energy into is a couple of things. First is a whole set of demands at the federal level and at the local level. As Phil described, that policing, operates on many different channels. And what we need to recognize is that while there are a lot of things that can happen at the federal level, locally all around the country, there are decisions that are being made in communities around how policing is executed, where community needs to hold a deeper level of accountability. At the state level, we need new laws. So at Color of Change, we've built a whole platform around a set of demands and are working to build more energy of everyday people to take action. We're fighting for justice for Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. We're also fighting for justice for other folks whose names that you haven't heard, Nina Pop and others, whose stories of injustice and the relationship to the criminal justice system represent all the ways in which fighting right now is important. Over the last couple of years, we have worked to build a movement to hold district attorneys accountable and to change the role of district attorneys in our country. And through the Winning Justice platform at Color of Change, www.winningjustice.org, what we have worked to do is channel the energy of everyday people to take action. So for folks who are watching what's happening on TV, seeing it on their social media feeds, and are outraged about what's happening in Georgia, what's happening in Tennessee, what's happening in Minnesota, you yourself probably, most likely, live in a place, in a community where you have a district attorney that will not hold police accountable, that will not prosecute police when they harm, hurt Black folks, when they violate the laws. You live in a community where police are part of the structure that is racking up mass incarceration, but many other aspects of our system are racking up mass incarceration, and district attorneys are at the center of it. You live in those communities and you need to do something about it. And so at winningjustice.org, we've created the only searchable national database on the 2,400 prosecutors around the country. We're building local squads in communities for folks to be able to engage around efforts to hold DAs accountable. We've worked with our partners across the movement, from our friends in Black Lives Matter to folks who do policy work, to our friends at local ACLU chapters around the country, to build 6 demands. 6 demands that folks can get behind in terms of pushing for reform. And then we've built public education material. But the only way that we work to change the way that prosecution happens in this country is that if people get involved, if people raise their voice, if people join us in pushing for real change. At the end of the day, I want people to recognize, though, and Philip talked a little bit about this, is that people don't experience issues, they experience life. That the forces that hold us back are deeply interrelated. A racist criminal justice system requires a racist media culture to survive. A political inequality follows economic inequality, and they all go hand in hand. And so I also want us to not take ourselves out of the equation. We likely work inside of corporations that may post symbols for Black Lives Matter one day and then support politicians that work to destroy Black Lives Matter the next day. We oftentimes are engaged in practices inside of our companies or in our daily lives, supporting media properties and others that are harming our communities or telling stories. Recently, we produced a report at Color of Change with the Norman Lear School at USC. It's called Normalizing Injustice, and it can be found at changehollywood.org. And Normalizing Injustice looks at the 22 crime procedurals, those crime shows on TV, and looks at all of the ways in which they sort of create a warped perception about our view of justice. They create sort of an incentive for the type of policing we see on the country and actually serve as a PR arm for law enforcement. We've been working in writers' rooms around the country to work to push folks to tell better stories, but we need folks to be both active listeners, and we need folks in the industry to push back and challenge those, not only the structures that lead to that content coming on the air, but the proliferation across our airwaves. At the end of the day, we have an opportunity in this moment to make change. Inflection points are those moments where we have an opportunity to make huge leaps forward, or the real threat of falling backwards. In our hands is the ability to do some incredible things about undoing so many of the injustices that have stood in the way of progress for far too long. But everyday people must get involved. We must channel that presence into power, and we must build the type of power that changes the rules. Racism, in so many ways, is like water pouring over a floor with holes in it. In every single way, it will find the holes. And so for us, we cannot simply accept charitable solutions to structural problems, but we actually have to work for structural change. And so I want to end by saying one thing about how we talk about Black people and how we talk about Black communities in this moment. Because we have to say what we mean, and we have to build the narrative that gets us to where we want to go. So far too often we talk about Black communities as vulnerable. We talk about Black people as vulnerable. But vulnerability is a personal trait. Black communities have been under attack. Black communities have been exploited. Black communities have been targeted. And we need to say that so we don't put the onus on fixing Black families and Black communities, but we put the onus on fixing the structures that have harmed us. We will say things like Black people are less likely to get loans from banks instead of saying that banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. This is our opportunity to build the type of progress that makes real change. And at that center of the story, we need to show and elevate the images, not just of the pain that we are facing, but of the joy, the brilliance, and the creativity that Black people have brought to this country. Black people are the protagonists of this story. And we need to make sure that as we work to build a new tomorrow, we ensure that the heroes are at the center of the liberation that we all need. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. Dr. Bernice King is the CEO of the King Center in Atlanta, Georgia. The center is a living memorial to her father, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's dedicated to inspiring new generations to carry his work forward. In this moment when so many are hurting, how can we better approach unity and collective healing? Dr. King, over to you.
My heart is a little heavy right now because I was that 6-year-old. I was 5 years old when my father was assassinated. And he did change the world. But the tragedy is that we didn't hear what he was saying to us as a prophet to this nation. And his words are now reverberating back to us. Change, we all know, is necessary right now. And yet it's not easy. We know that there has to be changes in policing in this nation of ours. But I want to talk about America's choice at a greater level. The prophet said to us, we still have a choice today: nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. What we have witnessed over the last 8 days has placed that choice before us. We have seen literally in the streets of our nation people who have been following the path of nonviolent protest and people who have been hell-bent on destruction. Those choices are now looking at us, and we have to make a choice. The history of this nation was founded in violence. In fact, my father said, America is the greatest purveyor of violence. And the only way forward is if we repent for being a nation built on violence. And I'm not just talking about physical violence. I'm talking about systemic violence. I'm talking about policy violence. I'm talking about what he spoke of the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism, all violent. Albert Einstein said something to us. He said, we cannot solve problems on the same level of thinking in which they were created. And so if we are going to move forward, we are going to have to deconstruct these systems of violence that we have set in America, and we're going to have to reconstruct on another foundation. That foundation happens to be love and nonviolence. And so as we move forward, we can correct course if we make that choice that Daddy said, nonviolent coexistence, and not continue on the pathway of violent co-annihilation. So what does that look like? That looks like some deconstruction work in order to get to the construction. We have to deconstruct our thinking. We got to deconstruct the way in which we see people and deconstruct the way in which we operate, practice, and engage and set policy. And so I believe that there's a lot of heart, H-E-A-R-T work to do in the midst of all the H-A-R-D, hard work to do. Because heart work is hard work. One of the things we have to do is we have to ensure that everyone, especially my white brothers and sisters, have to engage in the heart work, the anti-racism work in our hearts. No one is exempt from this, especially in my white community. We must do that work in our hearts, the anti-racism work. The second thing is that I encourage people to look at the nonviolence training that we do at the King Center, thekingcenter.org, so that we learn the foundation of understanding our interrelatedness and interconnectedness. That we understand our loyalties and our commitments and our policy making can no longer be devoted to one group of people, but has to be devoted to the greater good of all people. And so I'm inviting people to even join us on our online protest that's happening every night at 7 o'clock p.m. on the King Center Facebook page, because so many people have things that they want to express and contribute to this. We all have to change and have to make a choice. It is a choice to change the direction that we have been going. We need a revolution of values in this country. That's what my daddy said. He changed the world. He changed hearts. And now, what has happened over the last 7, 8 years and through history, we have to change course. And we all have to participate in changing America with a true revolution of values where people are at the center and not profit, where morality is at the center and not our military might. America does have a choice. We can either choose to go down continually that path of destruction, or we can choose nonviolent coexistence. And as my mother said, struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. Every generation is called to this freedom struggle. You as a person may want to exempt yourself, but every generation is called. And so I encourage corporations in America to start doing anti-racism work within corporate America. I encourage every industry to start doing anti-racism work and pick up the banner of understanding nonviolent change, personally and from a social change perspective. We can do this. We can make the right choice to ultimately build the beloved community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. King. Anthony Romero is the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union. As one of the nation's oldest social justice organizations, the ACLU has advocated for racial equality and shown deep support to the Black community in moments of crisis. And in moments like these, Black voices are almost always the loudest, and at times the silence from our non-Black brothers and sisters rather, can feel deafening. How we can bring our allies into the mix to better support ending systemic violence and racism against the Black community is a question top of mind for a lot of us. Anthony, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you, Chris, for inviting me to join this TED community. I think community is really important right now. With so many of us feeling the trepidation, the weariness, the anger, the fear, the frustration, the terrorism that we experience in our communities, this is a time to huddle around a virtual campfire with your posse, with your family, with your loved ones, with your network. It's not a time to be isolated or alone. And I think for allies in this struggle, those of us who don't live this experience every day, it is time for us to lean in. You can't change the channel. You can't tune out. You can't say this is too hard. It is not that hard for us to listen and learn and heed. It is the only way we're going to build out of this, by hearing the voices of Rashad and Phil and Dr. King, by hearing the voices of our neighbors and loved ones, by hearing the voices on Twitter of people who we don't know. And so white communities and allied organizations need to pay even closer attention. This is the test of your character. Are you willing to lean in and to engage? For me, I have, these have been really hard couple of weeks. I feel like this is really a test of whether or not we really believe in the American experiment. Do we really believe it? Do we really believe that out of many, one? That a country with no unifying language, no unifying culture, no unifying religion, can we really become one people? all equal before the law, all bound together with a belief in the rule of law? Do we really believe that, or do we just think a nice saying to see in the back of a paper dollar? And for me, this is a referendum on the American experiment, on whether we really believe. And the future is in our hands. And this is not like other crises. I've been the head of the ACLU for almost 20 years. I feel like I've seen it all. This is different. And this is different because it is cumulative, like Phil and Rashad and Dr. King told us. This is centuries of systemic discrimination. And the bill has come due. And it will continue to be due. And we will pay. Unless we really do something quite different. I have been scratching my head at the ACLU for the last week. We've been at this for 100 years. My organization's been working on this from its inception. In 1931, we were involved with this report about lawlessness in law enforcement. That was our first report that we got behind in 1931. We opened up our first storefronts after the riots in Watts, so that we could bring legal services and lawyers to the community, so they could demand justice from the police departments. We brought Miranda, the right to remain silent. We brought Gideon, the right to a court-appointed attorney if you can't afford one. We fought Bloomberg on stop and frisk. It took him years and a loss in front of our litigation to finally apologize. We've been at this for 100 years. And for the communities that have lived this for 400 years. God. And I've been scratching my head thinking, it ain't working. We don't need another pattern and practice lawsuits. We need another training program on racial bias or implicit bias in police departments. We don't need to find another lawsuit on qualified immunity. We don't need to kind of bring another race discrimination or gender discrimination lawsuit to integrate the police department. Yeah, we've done that, and we will continue to do that. For me, where I've come is that we need to defund the budgets of these police departments. It's the only way we're going to take power back. And the more I've read over the last couple of weeks about where this country is, the more I'm clear that that is my North Star at the moment. We will continue to bring the litigation on qualified immunity. We will do the efforts to hold unaccountable law enforcement officials accountable. We will bring patterns and practice lawsuits because the Justice Department is not doing that. So we will continue doing all that good work. But the real thing is we're going to go after those budgets. When you look at the fact that we spend $100 million on policing, more than incarceration, that the city of Minneapolis spent 30% of their budget on policing. The city of Oakland, 41% on policing. That when you have New York City Police Department spends more money on policing than it does on housing and preservation development, community youth services, homelessness, we're going after the money. And that's hardcore advocacy. Bills dropped in local legislatures to cut the funding for police, to stop these programs that give the federal military surplus to police departments so they become like little mini armies. These don't look like police officers. These look like standing armies. And the enemy are communities of color. So we need to take away their toys. We need to cut their budgets. We need to shrink the police infrastructure so that we can get police out of the quotidian lives of people of color and communities of color. The ubiquitousness of police enforcement on things that the police do not have a role, should not have a role to play. People should not lose their lives over whether or not a cigarette pack has a proper tax stamp or whether a $20 bill was forged or not. That's not worthy of spending our dollars on police. Get them out of that business. Let's focus on the most important and the most serious of crimes, and that's it. That's it. We're going to de-police our communities, shrink those budgets. We're going to reinvest those monies in local communities. It will be like water on stone campaigns in local legislatures, local city councils. We'll have report cards for people who talk out of both sides of their mouth and say, we believe in police reform, and yet they're still going to vote for 30 or 40% for the police. We're going to put that right to the public. And I think we just have to stay at it, because I think that's the only way we can get at this in a different way, because much of what we tried to do is just simply not working. With that, I struggle with, how do you find the optimism in this moment? Because you have to find the optimism. You have to find the way to. I still think that even though in the face of so many setbacks, there's been change. It's been too little, too slow, not enough. We need to kind of rocket boost it. But you can't lose sight of the optimism. And, I've been thinking about who are the folks who inspire me. Dr. King's father, of course. And the words of Rashad and Patrice Cullors and others have inspired me. But I found inspiration in the words of a scholar I really don't like very much, Sam Huntington, kind of often criticized as being a conservative or racist. But sometimes you can find inspiration even in your enemy's words. And in one of his books, which I pulled off this shelf I had, he writes about how America is a disappointment because it failed to live up to its aspirations. And he actually started talking about it as America is a failure because it doesn't live up to its ideals. But it's not a failure. It's not a bunch of lies. It's a disappointment. And in the disappointment also is the fact that there's hope. I'm paraphrasing it, but I think we have to kind of wrap all of that together and think about the disappointment and the hope and the resolve to do better. And we need to listen and lean in. And I thank the TED community. I thank Dr. King. I thank Rashad. I thank Phil. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you to all four of you. That was astonishing. I guess we're bringing everyone back now to have a conversation among us, to ask some questions from our community. I hope you're entering those questions. So I don't know whether we can bring back our guests onto the screen at this point. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I guess I'll start. Let me start with a question to you, Dr. King. I was so inspired by what you said. Your father, of course, also deeply understood the anger that leads to protests. I think he said that protests are the language of the unheard. And I'm wondering what you would say to someone right now who is angered beyond measure by what's happened and also sees this could be the moment, like someone who believes that the system is so fundamentally broken that our best choice is to tear it down, that is actually, that this may be a once in a generational moment to do that. And so to actually believe that protests, including violent protests, actually is the way right now. What would you say to someone who felt that?
First, I just wanted to make just a slight correction. He said riots are the language of the unheard.
I apologize.
But
I apologize.
yeah, that's no problem.
That is the point even more powerfully. Yeah.
Yes. Protest we must, and we must continue to always protest to keep the issues and the awareness before people. But when a person is angry, sometimes it's hard to reach them. I've been on that journey. I was at a stage in my life where I was so angry I wanted to destroy, and I'm the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. And grew up in a household of love and nonviolence and forgiveness. And I had to go through that journey. I was surrounded by the right kind of influences, fortunately, because that would have been a sad story. But I think it's really allowing ourselves to hear the anger and allowing the space for the anger, but also trying to help young people rechannel that energy. And we've got to start ensuring that we connect them to some of the work that has been and now is elevated to another place. Color Change, the work that you're doing the ACLU, the work that they're doing, because sometimes there's this disconnection that intensifies the emotion and makes you feel helpless. But if you can channel that anger, connect it with action that is toward creating the social and economic change, then it begins to build you up, and then you can begin to become more constructive with the anger.
We have some questions that are coming in from our community, but before we do that, you all shared such powerful and meaningful statements right now, and many of you touched on the fact that this is not the first time that we're experiencing this, the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. This is these are three of many, many instances just like this. And I'd love to hear you all address what has sort of brought us to this boiling point, to what has contributed to this moment where we're now experiencing things, as Anthony, as you said, that feels so much worse than other moments. And that's it. Anyone who feels comfortable to sort of take that question.
I think I wanted to say something real quick to that. I think we've always been at that moment, but this moment is different because of the void in leadership. There's no real moral voice in our country, and the person who sits in the office of the presidency is not, leading in the right way. And so it is, and has kind of, has given license to certain things. And so now it's, he's lit the fires.
Yeah.
So Chris, the
thing I'll add here is that, I think a couple of things. For the last couple of months, we have been both seeing and experiencing all of the ways that this country's decisions of underinvestment, of targeting Black communities, has been killing Black people through COVID. And while we've been in our homes, we have also been watching how the media has blamed us, as we have been the essential workers in so many places, and trying to ensure that this country keeps going. We've watched white men with guns show up to capitals with demanding basically Black and brown people go back to work. And then we see this 8-minute video with a police officer with his knee on someone's neck after seeing that video of Ahmaud Arbery and hearing the story of Breonna Taylor. And we see him looking in the camera, basically knowing that America was not going to punish him. And what I think is that it's just enough is enough, that people didn't feel that they had a channel for that outrage. And because people had been inside, and because people had been experiencing all the ways in which the structures had also been colluding to kill us, that what we're seeing is a alignment of all of those things, where people are making demands that are much bigger and much bolder than before. And we recognize that while we don't have leadership at the federal level, we also have to recognize that no political party can say that they have been neither political party can say they've been 100% on the right side of all these issues. And so people are mobilizing. They are fighting back like never before. And in some ways, people are unwilling to accept answers like just go vote, or just participate in the process, because we recognize that Black people have been voting, Black people have been part of voting and part of ensuring that. And so that, I think, is why this moment feels so much different, combined with, for the last 7 years, since Trayvon, we have seen the growth of a new movement of activists and leaders all around the country who are also in a very different place to be able to move the needle on so much of what's possible.
We have a question here from Genesis B. If you can get that up here. Here in Mississippi, the police is synonymous with the Klan historically. How do we purge law enforcement of white supremacists?
So I guess that's partially to me, being the psychologist of bias. I'll say that just yesterday, we had an officer in Denver who posted on social media himself and 2 other officers saying, "Let's go start a riot." He was fired that day. I worry about all the officers that the FBI has now, for almost half a decade, been warning us, law enforcement and unions are being infiltrated by white supremacists. And all the officers that have social media accounts, but they're private. The Invisible Institute has put some things forward. We're not talking seriously about the domestic terrorism threat that white supremacy represents. So the first thing we got to do is we got to take it seriously. We have to actually say out loud, and I can't believe that on a day like today, on a week like this week, I have to say out loud, white supremacy is alive and well and a driving force of American politics. This shouldn't be controversial. I shouldn't be looking forward to getting hate mail in my inbox for it, but that's the reality. So the first part of solving a problem is acknowledging it exists. So the second thing is we need to arm municipalities, that's law enforcement, but even more so communities, with the ability to take action when someone violates their values. Right now, I think about the case in Philadelphia where Charles Ramsey, when he was chief there, he was commissioner there, fired 6 officers, right? Concerns about racial bias and concerns about police brutality, and those 6 officers were back on the same job inside of 3 months. We now have a law enforcement system that says you can lose your job in one jurisdiction and get the same job as law enforcement in another jurisdiction. And without the national registry and the capacity for law enforcement to make different decisions, we're going to have this exact problem, not just in Mississippi, but in Minneapolis and Louisville, in New York and LA.
Phil, how much of the problem stems from the fact that police unions have a huge amount of power to protect and sometimes reinstate so-called bad apple officers?
Yeah, so I'm getting this question a lot, and police unions are one of the most powerful labor forces in the United States and are unique within the labor movement, right? So it's police unions and teachers unions are the 2 largest and could not be 2 different groups of folks. When I talk to union leadership, that's the leadership that wants to talk to Dr. Blackenstein, right? When I talk to union leadership, what they say is no one hates a bad officer more than a good officer. But the union contracts and union negotiations don't look like that's true. What they look like is anybody gets in trouble, and the union's only job is to make sure whatever officer is in trouble gets to maintain their job. The perverse incentive here is that when people run for union leadership, no one can run saying, these people shouldn't be in the union. It's very hard to do that. What you can run on is say, this person didn't protect you enough, right? I'll protect you even more. The bigots, I'll protect even them. So we have this perverse incentive where union leadership ends up not really representing the values even of the rest of the union members, but they have massive outsized negotiating power. So yes, engaging with an appropriate right sizing of labor protections for folks whose jobs are difficult, but who should not be protected from the basic values of human rights, human dignity, and public safety. It's got to be part of the process. I mean, when unions are negotiating a 2-year ban on keeping of records so that there's no ability even to trace what's happening in the state of California historically in terms of police misconduct, that's not in the interest of public safety, public legitimacy, or our democracy.
Yeah, the thing I would add, Chris, is that I think the labor union piece is a critically important one to think through. Because I think, like Phil said, they are a key part of the puzzle that's we'll have to solve for. And, it's frustrating when you look at a place like Minneapolis that Phil knows better than I, but when Mayor Jacob Frey, the one who's on TV all the time saying many of the right things that you want an elected official to say at times like this, when he banned his police department from attending the warrior training that was being offered, it was the Minneapolis Police Federation, the local union, that defied him and sent their police to the training. And so we need to really be clear that we need to have the police forces under civilian control. I know this sounds so elementary. I feel like I'm talking about a Latin American kind of totalitarian context, but we need to kind of exert civilian control of our police in a way that we have yet not been able to think through. And a key part of that is the labor unions of the police. And there are moments when you can find common ground. When we brought one of our COVID-related lawsuits to deal with the outbreak of the pandemic in a Maryland jail. We worked really hard. I worked the phones with the head of police unions. We got one of the local unions